this meeting of July 22nd, 2020 of the Community Budget Advisory Committee to order. First order of business is approval of the agenda.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Then we'll go on to 4.1, information and updates. Kari.
All right. Well, good evening, Community Budget Advisory Committee. It's good to see you tonight. And before I get started with the information and updates, I just wanted to point out that you have some handouts. So, of course, you have the printout of the agenda, but then there's also a handout with some information that Jamie wanted to share with you that was updated. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Jamie? What? Okay, so there's just some more information, just with comparison to cities, and that has been updated since the last time we shared that with you. And then also, when we get to the facilities fund, there's a facility condition index chart, and you'll see when I bring it up on the presentation, it's hard to read, so we made printouts of that so you could see it better. So with that, I'll get started. I'll try to go through this fairly quickly because we do have a pretty full agenda with all of the internal service funds that we'll be going through. And of course, just always gonna, the co-chairs always said to start off and just keep showing the deliverables that we're working towards. So here's that slide. And just quickly with some upcoming dates, Brianna had sent an email out about possibly adding a meeting to our schedule to make sure we had enough time to get through everything before presenting a preliminary tax levy. So that would be the Wednesday, August 12th. And I think we've heard back from some, but wanted to get a sense from the committee if we wanted to go forward with scheduling that as a meeting. Yep. It's kind of the consensus that I know there was maybe one person that was for sure not able to make it. Was that John?
Yeah, I have a conflict with a board meeting. I'm not sure the agenda, so I may be able to zoom in for a piece of it.
Okay. So I think that we'll go ahead and put that out on the official agenda. So it'll be pretty much every Wednesday night. We're going to have a meeting. Okay, great. And then next Monday, or not next Monday, but the first Monday in August, it's on the schedule to do an update to the City Council, and I just wanted to check with Chair Peterson if you were still all right with doing that, or
Yes.
Yes, that's good. Okay, and then on here we've got the dates for part of the engagement plan. I was wanting to just get some feedback about the draft of the plan that Emily Larson, who was here a few weeks ago talking about community engagement, put out. If you'd had a chance to look through that, if you'd had any ideas about any changes that you wanted to add, or just your feelings on that, if we were okay to go forward and finalize that and have direct staff to start working on those things. So
Neil.
Thank you. Yeah, I read through it, and I had a couple of questions that I was concerned about. First of all, it talked about the listening sessions and the contact list. I do not want to be on that contact list. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know about the rest of you, but I've sat through 20 years of hearings and updates, and they can be really nasty, and that's not part of my sign-up. So that's one thing. Second thing, you start asking some of the questions that she had listed, potential questions. People are going to look and say, why are you asking that question? I think there needs to be a statement that says that the budget, the shortfall is caused by a lack of revenue of a number, $6 million, that's gone away as a result of room tax and the
admission taxes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that you frame the question and say, why are you asking? It was because we're short that kind of money. It's going to impact us in 21, 22, 23. And so therefore, we need to start asking questions. What is your reaction to what we need to do? And the first question she had was, do you like things in Bloomington? I don't think we need to go there. I think we need to get very, very direct and say, this is why we're asking. And they'll have an opinion. I mean, they'll have a bang the table opinion, I'm sure. That's one thing. The other thing was she talked about the contact list of different groups to contact, and she had 2 or 3 of them there. Can that be expanded? Because that's a pretty limited group. And I look at it and I say, I know who the stakeholders are in Bloomington. First of all, they're seniors, and they live in condos, and they live in co-ops. And you'd better get some information to each of those groups and say, do you have some people that might want to weigh into this? We have hundreds of people who are appointed to different commissions, Park Commission, everything. We've got all kinds of people. They're stakeholders, and they're interested because they're doing something. They need to be in this process some way. You have all kinds of, what else I have written down? You've got the theater group, you've got the orchestra, you've got the park. All those people are demonstrated stakeholders, and they are taxpayers, most of them. And the people that get impacted on this, there are a lot of people who get impacted by a loss of a service, granted. But the other half of the scenario are people who are going to pay to make up this shortfall, i.e. the tax increase. And they're going to come screaming. So we better lay that question out as to why we're asking it, and we better broaden the scope to some of these other places and interest groups, or you're just, it's just fluff.
Thank you, Chair Peterson, for that feedback. Is there any other feedback?
John?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. Mine is a little bit simpler than that. I think it was a fine enough start, but I think it will be pretty good and will help us if we can throw some pretty specific things out for people to react to. I just had a little bit of a sense that it might be more generic than could bring us the benefits that we might get from that input. And I get back to the notion, if we had something that people could react to, maybe it's a simple card, go to where they are, but have enough specificity that we might really get the temperature on some items. Just a thought.
Other input? John?
Mr. Chair and members, I agree, Neil, that I think we need to be very careful on what we ask for. We don't want to get into a debate, and we don't want to get into, we'll get back to you next week with the answer to that. It's got to be kind of a self-evident process that whatever we ask of the public, and I agree, there's a lot of public that aren't going to step forward, so we have to approach them and ask them a question with rather evident. Anybody that's plugged in at all would, okay, there's this $6 million, and here are the 3, 4, or 5 reasons why that money is missing. And here's a couple of options, or what would you suggest that we do to recover that money? And maybe we put up a couple of options, maybe we don't. It depends if we can simplify it enough. But it's got to be a one and done. Mm-hmm. And if it's not simple enough, then I think we just confuse the issue instead of solve the issue.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thanks. We'll bring that back to Emily and send out a revised version with those ideas incorporated. Okay, so now I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. So these were questions that came out. We had a lot of great questions from the last meeting that we weren't able to answer on site. So here I have those answers for you now. So one of the questions was what % tax levy increase will it take to cover the entire 2021 budget shortfall that we're projecting with the tax levy? And so basically with not adjusting anything else and just making it up, keeping everything the same, it would be about 10% increase in the tax levy from 2020. And what are the actual 2020 revenue and expenses to date? And actually the June financial report, which will have year-end projections, which will keep getting updated as we go, will be ready for the city council by the end of this week. So we can share that with the committee on Friday.
Excuse me, Jerry?
Oh, yes.
John? Going back to the beginning there, the 10%, is that an additional 10% or move the levy up to 10%?
It would be increasing the levy to about 10% from where it was in 2020, which would be between $6 and $7 million increase.
But, so what was the levy last year? 5 something?
65 million?
So it'd be 15?
No. So last year the tax levy increased by 4.75% from the previous year. So this, if we were to increase it by like between 6 and 7 million to have more property tax revenue to cover the shortfall from lodging and admission tax revenue, it would be around a 10% increase.
I'm still not understanding maybe I'm asking the question wrong.
Maybe a simpler way to say it would basically be an additional between $6 and $7 million more in the.
But you've got a percentage, so please, if you would be so kind as to answer in a percentage.
Yeah.
10%
But 10% of what?
of over this year. So the levy that was set for 2020 would have to increase 10% for 2021.
An additional 10% over what it was last year?
Yes,
Okay,
Correct. Yes,
that's a big number.
it is.
correct.
Thank you.
Can I go off script for just a second,
Yes,
Kari?
sir.
So the some of you may have been paying attention last year during the truth and taxation period. That 4.75% that the council set actually ended up having a more significant impact on single-family taxpayers because of the property valuation increases on top of the tax increase. So there was about I want to say a 4 to 5% valuation increase, and the impact ended up being about 9% for the average, for the median value home. This year, what we're modeling is that the tax levy increase will basically match the impact because the values are staying pretty flat going into next year. So there isn't the double whammy effect that we had coming into 2020 when you had valuation increase plus tax levy increase. This year, if there is going to be a tax levy increase, that'll essentially be the impact that the median value home will have.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I would like to ask if we have the last 5 years paid taxes, if that's something that we can have by district, how that imply, how that compares from the last year, that's last 5 years to right now. And then I think that information will give us an understanding of what the community has been upfront. And then I was thinking if there is a way to target what is unemployment right now. I think that those two numbers could give us some information of how much on percentage we can increase on a tax levy, taking those in consideration, what was the previous increases year after year, and what is the unemployment has been as well.
And Mr. Chair and committee members, Jessica, just so I understand what the question, did I hear you say you'd like to see the 5-year history by district, so within each of the 4 districts of the city?
Correct.
Okay. We can ask our assessing division if we can do that, committee members. They have in the annual assessing report broken down the valuation increases geographically based on their assessing areas. So I think that they have in the past shown the difference in the 4 districts. I'll have to ask them if they have that available for a 5-year time frame, because it's not something that we do annually. So I may not have it for this week's information packet that would go out for the next meeting. It may take a little bit longer than that, but I'm pretty sure that they can do that. We can very easily present the 5-year history of the tax levy increases citywide and for the median value home, but I don't think that's getting at what you're asking, Jessica, which is to see some of the variation within the community.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So one piece of feedback on that is that, and this is as much for Jessica as for the staff. I think, Jessica, if you could look at the assessing report and look at the map in there and the data that's in there, and see if the data that's organized by the assessment districts answers your question. I'd rather try to satisfy that with that data, which is easier, which already compiled and easier to do than to go compile a new report. So if you could maybe connect up with staff after the meeting and have that conversation, then they could use that to prepare the 5-year history as opposed to creating a new kind of categorization of properties, which might take some effort to do, and this might be easier to if it answers your question.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So next question was about, should Bloomington revisit the commitment of dollars to South Loop, or should we look at helping all taxpayers? And so the Port Authority Administrator, Shane Rudling, responded to this question. And just as an overview, the lodging tax in Bloomington is 7%, and that 7% is split 3 ways, with Bloomington's Convention and Visitors Bureau receiving 2%, City General Fund receiving 3%, and the South Loop Development Fund getting 2%. And then there is also a citywide on-sale liquor tax of 3%, and that also flows to the South Loop Development Fund. And the tax revenues that the South Loop Development Fund receives are dedicated to a list of operations, chiefly the police operations in South Loop, and then also infrastructure improvements, all of which are slated to implement the City Council and the Port Authority approved South Loop District Plan. And then on the slide here as well, just the history. The South Loop Development Fund its history is rooted in the development of the Mall of America, where the funds were used as a backstop for the TIF supported loans for the mall parking ramps. And then under the law, statutorily, the funds can only be used to fund economic development activities in South Loop. And then changing the statute would require action by the Minnesota legislature, and diverting some or all of the funds would impact the implementation of the South Loop District Plan. So that's information from Shane Rudling. Next question.
Saying no.
No international travel will have a negative adverse financial impacts. What's the potential impact? And so this is from Mark Reichel from last week. And he said, our best guess is that lodging tax revenues will be down 59% for 2020 and 32% for 21 and 22 for 2022. So the impact to the general fund alone because of this is estimated at $12.2 million. And then another question about the estimated number of hotels that will close by the end of this year, next year. And so by the end of 2021, what the Community Development Department was estimating is that there could be 2 less hotels operating in the city of Bloomington, and the number could be as high as 4 depending on redevelopment and residential conversion market conditions as well as governmental service needs. This was some information that was asked last week about how multifamily senior housing property taxes are similar or different to single homes. So Mark Reichel put some information together on some different multifamily senior housing property. So you can see in this slide here, so last year the overall tax levy went up by 4.75%. And the monthly cost for 2020 for someone here would be $80.32 a month in taxes just for the city. So you can see with their value change, a flat, like no tax levy increase would still be an increase of $2.94 a month based on their valuation increasing. And you can see if it goes up by 1%, 2%, 3%, that does go up. And he also this last one was for the Applewood Point Co-op, West Old Shakopee. And then Indigo was another senior housing complex that he looked at. And this one, again, if it was flat, it would go up 50 cents a month. If it went up 1%, $1.39 per month for the city tax monthly. And then third one he just looked at is just to show an example. This is South Point. And for this one, if a flat levy would go up $1.17 per month, and that the current monthly cost is $44.47 a month. So just to give you some additional information of things other than the median value home that we typically look at.
Excuse me. We get copies of that because we can't read
We will.
it. So
This will all be in.
packet.
This will all be published when the minutes, the presentations, and they'll also be posted on the website. So all of the presentations that we're doing are on the website page that's dedicated to the Budget Advisory Committee.
Any other questions? The other thing I think that's interesting, just to go back to these two slides to look at, is that is to think about the kind of changes in prices too, because remember the levy is an absolute dollar amount; it's not adjusted for inflation. And if you look at inflation numbers, there's actually some evidence that there was more inflation in June than we've had previously. So it may be, we'll have to watch that a little bit, but it may be that we have to pay a little bit of attention to inflation as part of that. So historically, we haven't paid close attention to inflation because it's been fairly low recently, but with the different circumstances, unclear what's going to happen with it. Okay, why don't you go ahead? Oh, John.
Mr. Chair, there's some talk about a few of the hotels being taken offline and made into either temporary or permanent homeless shelters here in Bloomington. Do we know if those are taxable, or has it become government property and no tax?
Mr. Chairs, committee members, and John, I don't have any information that that's going to happen. I've heard similar things. My expectation would be that they would become tax-exempt properties if they were purchased by the county. So that's one of the things that our staff is doing right now, is analyzing the potential impact both from a property tax and a lodging tax impact.
Yeah, because if it were some other source of occupation, then there could be a tax involved. But having the county do that is a kind of a double whammy for us. Thank you.
This next question was the chance of recovery of the first quarter 2020 lodging delinquencies. And so this information has, at the top of the slide, 3 establishments that are delinquent. And the first 2, the expected payment date is unknown. And they currently, one owes around $10,000 and one's a little under $5,000. These are admission establishments where we receive admission tax. And then we are expecting payment for the third one that's been delinquent. And then for lodging tax delinquencies, there's 7 hotels that are that currently have delinquencies. And the first 2, there's some payment expected, or we're working on making some partial payments, but the other 5, it's unknown. And just as a note, we receive the taxes monthly, and so the June taxes are due July 27th. So we'll see how they continue to come in. This was
Maureen, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you go back to that slide, Carrie? And I forgot my glasses. What is the total amount currently that is delinquent?
Oh, sure. Yes. So for admission tax delinquencies, the total is almost $24,000 for admission tax. And then for lodging tax delinquencies, the total is almost $240,000, but then about $103,000 is for the general fund, because that gets split.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Question about the 6.7 million CARES funding, the federal funding that came through the state for the city of Bloomington. And the question was, what will it be used for and how much has been spent to date? So it's very specific what it can be used for, and it's things dealing with the COVID-19, dealing with addressing that, and expenses like medical expenses, public health expenses, payroll for public safety, public health, healthcare, human services, and actions to facilitate compliance, expenses associated with helping with economic support. And then here is a where we are so far today. So we had around 6.7 million that was allocated to Bloomington, and so far just with payroll, and this goes up until July 12th. It's about $1.8 million of related payroll expenses, and then a little over.
For Bloomington?
This is just for the city of Bloomington.
Okay.
Correct. Yes. Thank you for clarifying, Chair Peterson. And about $205,000 for protective equipment, professional services related to the COVID response. So far, a little under $2 million. And then things that we are going to be spending that we have obligated that the council has approved is $1.3 million of that money for small business loans, and then an additional $100,000 for a third-party administrator to administer the small business loans. And then some other things are subscriptions with like Green Street Advisors and TREP Analytics to gather information to analyze the economic impact of the pandemic. And then some other things like one of the big ones is community testing and contact tracing, $500,000. So that's more obligations. And then subtracting all of that from the 6.7 million, there's still 2.6 available for future uses, and we have to spend that by November 1st. I'm sorry, what was it, November 14th of this year? And if we do not need all of that for our COVID response, then we will return that to the state.
I have one question regarding this, which is, of the payroll that in the current period is being funded by the CARES funding, how much of that would otherwise fall into the general fund once that funding goes away?
We can, Chair Peterson and committee members, we can get that information.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can you how much is left?
The 2.6.
2.6 is left out of the 6.
Correct. But we are there are still payroll time hours that are being coded and other supplies and services that are still being tracked.
Also, committee members, the small business emergency loan program application period just opened yesterday, as a matter of fact. And all of the other cities that I'm aware of that have established a loan were oversubscribed. Our anticipation is that ours will be oversubscribed as well. The funding level, if everybody applied for the maximum amount available, which is $7,500 for a qualifying small business or $3,000 for a self-employed or sole proprietorship, would provide about 133 small business loans and 100 self-employed loans. So we have over 2,000 registered businesses in the community. Clearly, they don't all qualify as eligible under this program, but you get a sense when we're talking about funding for only 230 potential applicants. There is likely to be a need a little bit later this year. We're expecting to have a second round, and that some of these remaining funds will be allocated towards an additional round. We're also expecting that the crisis in rental housing assistance is going to persist and actually get worse at the end of this month. And we have already allocated funding to VEAP. Some of it came from the HRA, and that was a first tranche of what was in the first 100,000 or 200,000, the first one. And then the second round that came through our CDBG allocation, a special CDBG as part of the CARES funding, which was an additional 276,000, I believe. So we've already sent almost $500,000 to VEAP, and we're anticipating that we'll probably get another request here in a couple months from them as well.
Okay, John and then Maureen.
Mr. Chair, thanks. And I think the first half of Jamie's comment before might have answered it, but I'll ask a question and then make an observation. The question is there any realistic or real potential that the city would not be able to spend all of that amount? And then my opinion is if there's enough discretion on the economics, a slide or two back, there seemed like the economic assistance is a legitimate piece of this, expenses associated with the provision of economic support. It just strikes me that these businesses in Bloomington surviving really will have quite an impact on our 21 and 22 budget. So I would love to see if it's at all possible that all this money gets spent, and as much as it can be spent, keeping these businesses solvent for 21 and 22. Maybe that's obvious, but I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, Mr. Chairs, committee members, and John, we share the same objective of trying to utilize all the funds that have been allocated to us, and I think that we probably will, anticipating what some of those needs are going to be over the next couple months. If we do not use all of the funds that are allocated to us, the remaining amount will get repatriated essentially to HCMC. That was a special provision within the governor's allocation formula, is that for Hennepin County and Ramsey County cities, any remaining funds will go back to, I believe it's regions in Ramsey County, and it's HCMC for Hennepin County. So it stays within the county. It's not completely lost, but in terms of being able to utilize it within the community, we're starting from a similar place.
Maureen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was one of my questions, so thank you, John. On the slide, you said small business loans. So are these paybacks, or is it a grant?
They are forgivable loans. We're not allowed to call them grants.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
To answer the question from last week about how was the 2021 permit revenue forecast determined. So for permits, the building and inspection staff, they used current trends and then the 5-year averages to determine the 2021 budget numbers, and took a previous 5-year average from 2010 to 2014, that was during the last downturn, to project 2022. And currently the numbers are fairly conservative, as there are still a lot of unknowns. And then for food, lodging, license permits, environmental health staff coordinated with city clerk staff to forecast based on current licenses and expected changes. And then the last question here is was answered from community development planning. Will the in-progress multifamily developments that are in the works or in the permit process actually materialize in 2020 or in 2021? So here's a list of those that are in the pipeline. And what they said was that whether a multifamily project moves forward to the permit stage and is ultimately constructed depends on continued favorable market demands, availability of financing, and the ability of the project to pencil out as anticipated costs and revenues evolve. So this table is staff's best guess on the timing of the currently entitled multifamily projects. And then in addition to the projects on the slide, additional projects are in the pre-application phase, but until they've been before the Development Review Committee, those projects are not public. So given the volume of pre-application projects in the discussion phase, that staff anticipates additional projects beyond those listed here and will apply for building permits in 21 and beyond unless market conditions change dramatically. So as we said, this presentation will be posted on the website in the next couple days, and then it will also be part of the minutes for this meeting as well. So you'll have all that.
Okay, Neil, you had a question?
I did. Help my memory. So there was an article in the paper today about one of the projects going forward on the list. When it's built and developed in the South Loop, does that tax revenue come to Bloomington, or does it go into the South Loop TIF District?
Mr. Chairs and committee members, the Aon project, I think is the one that you were referencing that was in the news, is in the South Loop area. It's at 86th and 77. The TIF district will capture the revenue generated, the additional increment generated through the life of the district, which was just recently established. So it won't be coming into the city's general fund for some time.
Mr. Chairman, let me just make a statement. Mm-hmm. So that that apartment being developed helps people in housing. But as far as helping anybody who's a taxpayer in Bloomington at 86th and Oliver or wherever they're, doesn't do a thing. Doesn't fall into the general fund at all, doesn't help the tax base at all, and yet that authority sits over there with $80 million. And you just heard the report from Shane saying, well, nobody can touch it. It's a dedicated fund. And yet people saying, well, we can't change it or test. I say the city council and the mayor better get their stuff together because people are going to start attacking that.
The TIF district or the TIF fund that you're referring to for the South Loop with the $80 million was not utilized for the project for the multifamily. That project was specific to the property on which the project sits. So I think the public interest that was served by that project was, first of all, the maintenance of the retention of more than 300 units of affordable housing, and then the new project, which will add an additional about equal amount of affordable units to the city.
But, Mr. Chairman, and I'll shut up. The fact remains that we continue to give them 3% of the hotel tax and 2% of the liquor tax, and that's building that fund. And how does that help 86 and Oliver? So, and that's the problem we're dealing with. It's all sitting over there in a TIF. I understand. I was involved when we set that TIF up. I signed the papers. But that was a different time and a different place and a different era. And times they are a-changing.
Committee members, Mr. Chair, the South Loop Development Fund is where the liquor taxes go and where the 2% of the lodging taxes go. That's a different fund than the $80 million TIF fund. The $80 million TIF fund is the continuation of the original Mall of America tax increment, and it is being funded with tax increment from the Mall of America properties that would otherwise be going into the fiscal disparities pool. And so essentially what has happened with that legislation is that money that is being generated by commercial development in Bloomington would be sent out of Bloomington to the benefit of the rest of the 7-county metro area. And the legislation back in 2013 that created this specific fund is capturing those funds that would have been leaving Bloomington had it not been for that district being in place.
But the liquor tax and the ticket tax is not captured in...
Correct.
Okay.
Other questions? I see Lori's got a comment here.
switch.
I'm just switching here, so I had a mic. Just to add to what the city manager, Jimmy Verbrugge, had said, is when you look at South Loop, it's a development district. So that would be your cookie, and each TIF district would be your chocolate chip. So the Mall of America, North and South, are 2 chocolate chips. This new one for Aon is another chocolate chip. And so only in the area of those boundaries of that chocolate chip would that development district or that development for Aon pick up the tax increment from just that chip, not from the whole cookie. Does that help?
I understand the legitimacy of the projects. I understand the goodwill that went in and the great decision-making that signed it. My objection is that someday we have to face the fact that we're in this big predicament financially, and I keep hearing about the room tax going away and the liquor tax going away, and where's it going? It's going to the South Loop. So, I mean, it's at some point, it's not in our purview, and I apologize for taking up time. But at some point, somebody better start addressing it.
Other questions? John?
Mr. Chair, if I'm tracking here, I think the piece of the issues that Neil is shedding light on, though, that may be in our purview is that I read that article too, and my wife had to hear at breakfast a few thoughts about the economics of that for the broader populace. In some respects, when there's a forfeiture of the otherwise typical, for lack of a better word, property tax revenue, not talking about the lodging taxes and all that, but the property tax revenue from a project like that, at some point that does feel very close to the expense line is as we're trying to see an organization deliver services and get the revenue for doing that. And I think that may be an issue that touches at least on the purview of this group, that those projects are the kind of expenses in addition to revenue forbearance, if you will, to chase one of the objectives of the city. And the city has a lot of objectives, and I'm not suggesting, for instance, that's not a legitimate one, but it starts looking a lot more like an expense when we forfeit, if you will, as a collective, the economically natural revenue that would come from any other natural development at the parcel. And so I think it's a close cousin of some of the challenges that we're confronting here. It's just an observation.
And I think just a follow-up comment on that is that I think it's, under the governor's order, we can take these off now when we talk. So, because there's an exclusion for public meetings in the governor's order when you're testifying. If you look at the 3 deliverables that we have, which is to set a preliminary levy, to pick some sort of revenue level, and then pick an expense level to go with that. It's pretty clear that unwinding TIF districts or getting bills through the legislature are toughies to kind of deal with that. And so, I get what Neil is saying about this, but in terms of actionability for our group here, it's very difficult to connect it to the 3 deliverables that we have and the things that we're doing. And it's also going to be hard to bind us to try to bind the city council of the future into making decisions on TIF districts, because, clearly on this development, the council made a value judgment that kind of using the tax revenue that this project generates to generate more affordable housing made a lot of sense. And I suspect that was moving down the pipe well before we got into the situation that we're in right now. And that, in that context, that decision may very well have been a good policy decision. And so I think we need to make sure that we're spending our time on the problem we have to solve, because we've talked about the time issue that we have going on. At the same time, I think it's important to make sure that the council is hearing these messages. And one thing I will bring a little bit is at the report that I bring to the council meeting next Monday, I'll talk about the fact that we discussed this a little bit and wanted to relay a message about that to the council on that. But in the end, wishing that we could get something through the legislature or things like that. I think there was one bill that passed at the legislature this time, I think, in this special session, and everything else went away. So the likelihood of that happening is really low. Were there any other comments?
Mr. Chair, as a
Janie?
committee
Yeah.
member, if I just provide one additional thought as it pertains to the tax increment districts, especially, the idea that kind of tiptoes up to the side of being an expense as opposed to revenue is that the tax increment districts have a but-for test, right? But for the use of the increment, the project wouldn't happen. And so I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing here in terms of saying that the revenues don't accrue to the benefit of the rest of the community because it's captured in the district, when in fact the revenues wouldn't be generated because the project isn't happening. So TIF has been debated vigorously for the 50 years that it's been commonly used, and it's exactly this idea of who's benefiting from the TIF, and the fact is the increment wouldn't be generated if it weren't for the use of it where it's applied.
Okay, I'm going to kind of wind up the conversation at this point because we're 45 minutes into the report so that we can move on to the internal service funds. Thank you. So I'll call that item, which is item number 4.2, the internal service funds. And are we going to do them in the order of the handout and the agenda? Is that how we're going to go about it? Or did you want to do them in a different order?
Yes, they are going to be in, I believe they're in order of the agenda. I'll go through this here.
Okay.
So in the next few weeks, as you're hearing from departments, as they come to the meeting and talk about their services and talk about their budgets, you'll hear a lot about internal service fund charges, as they can be a sizable part of their budget. And so we just want you to understand before all that starts what their purpose is and how they work up front. And this is what we have outlined here. So we're going to start off with the Facilities and Park Maintenance Fund, and we're thinking that would be 45 minutes most. And we're kind of going in order of the amount of dollars that, on the sides of these budgets. So we're doing the big ones first and for longer. And then after that will be the Fleet and Equipment Fund. We have that scheduled for about 30 minutes. And then we're going to take a break. And one thing I didn't mention is, I'm sure you've all noticed, we have the easels again, just like we did last week, and we also have the Sharpies and the half sheets. So we're going to be doing similar things as we're going through these internal service funds. If you have ideas, policy ideas, changes, questions, things you want more information on, please write that as we're going. And then we'll have a chance to put those up and talk through those. We'll be doing separately for... we'll kind of see how things go and how our time is going, but we'll do that kind of after. We'll do it after the Facilities and Park Maintenance Fund and after the Fleet Fund. We're also planning to do it after the IT Fund and the Insurance Fund, and then the rest of the funds we'll kind of finish those up and then in total look at those. And wanted to let you know, so there's 8 internal service funds, and we'll be working through 7 this evening that are listed here. And the 8th one is the Public Safety Technology and Equipment Fund. And that will be reviewed at the August 5th meeting, along with when we're doing the general fund budgets for police and fire, because that's all contained. Those internal charges only go to police and fire. And then, so as I said, we'll take time between each one of these in the beginning to ask questions. And on the WebEx tonight, we have city staff that are going to be available for answering questions if you want to discuss things with them. So we have Public Works Director Carl Keel is on, and Facility Superintendent John Bradford, Fleet Supervisor Michael Keim, Chief Information Officer Amy Cheney, and our Risk and Litigation Manager Amy Larson will also be on. So they're sort of the experts, the managers of these internal service funds. So all right, we'll get started.
Kari, let me jump in real quickly for our staff who are presenting. I'm just going to ask them to move a little bit more briskly through their presentation. They may have otherwise, since we lost a little bit of time during the opening part of the meeting here. So we'll try to shave some time off as we go through the funds.
So, and this will be me presenting, but I will go quick. So, and then get some time for them to talk. So, overall, the internal service funds are used to account for activities that provide goods and services to other funds. So they charge out to each benefiting department, and then they use the funds received to pay for the item or service they provide. And that allows departmental budgets to more accurately reflect the true cost of providing a particular public service. So for example, if we did not have the charges of fleet or IT allocated to the police department, it would not accurately reflect the cost of running a police department without the vehicles and computers. And so for example, like for fleet charges in the police department, that's $1.5 million, and their IT charges are about $1.2 million. And they also allow for major expenses, such as large equipment vehicles, to be managed over time so that large purchases or significant cost increases are less likely to cause a spike in the budget for a particular year. And then we'll be talking about, as we go through these, working capital balance. So the working capital balance is what it is. It's the current assets less the current liabilities. And basically, you can think of that as the cash available that they have, like a cash reserve. And then that's their balance. Their working capital goal is the cash that they would ideally need for long-term forecast. And just wanted to point out, Brianna had sent out an email to everyone just highlighting that we've had several service assessments have been done over the past recent years. And she was highlighting there was one that was just done for the Fleet Fund, Internal Service Fund, also the IT Fund, and then the print shop really recently, which is part of our Support Services Fund. So that's kind of what it looks like on the website. And then, so as we review each fund, we're going to point out like what is the money that's going out, which are their expenses. What's the money coming in? That's internal department charges to other funds, other departments. And then what are we saving for? That's those working capital balances or cash reserves. So the Facilities and Park Maintenance Fund is a big fund. And it pays for the costs related to the capital repair and maintenance of the city's buildings. So parks, fire stations, cemetery. So there's facilities maintenance and the cleanliness and appearance, setup, security, temperature of facilities. They impact every event that happens in them and the public that visits those buildings. And then for park maintenance, it serves all the visitors to Bloomington parks, providing safe and inviting recreation opportunities. So next slide, this is, there's more than 60 city-owned assets, which is around 700,000 square feet of a value of more than $120 million, and they range from 0 to 164 years old. So the 0 would be the brand new Bloomington Fire Department station, Fire Station number 3 over in the South Loop. And then the oldest building is the Gideon Pond House, which was built in 1856. It's 164 years old. So the operating expenses of this fund, it's staff salaries and benefits. There's 40 full-time employees between facilities and park maintenance. They pay for the utility bills of the city, custodial services, the contractors like electricians, HVAC plumbers, garbage removal from the city buildings and parks, park maintenance expenses. And then they do also have internal charges, and the big ones are IT, and then also from the insurance fund. And then they have capital improvement projects like roof repairs, the doors, LED lighting, energy saving projects. So the way that we charge out to the departments, it's based on the square footage. So there's space and occupancy charges. So allocate the operating costs to departments based on their square footage. There's also building repairs that's based on allocation of capital outlay and debt service expenses for historical and future projects. And then park maintenance is 100% allocated to the Parks and Recreation Department. So it's a big part of the Parks and Recreation budget. And this is just a split, just a pie chart of the 6.8 million of like space and occupancy and building repairs. And you can see the big departments that have the majority of charges are Public Works, Parks and Rec, and Police. And then just to note that in addition to this, there is another 6.1 million of park maintenance charges, and that's all allocated to parks and recreation. This is the slide that you have a handout of because it's small. It's hard to read. What this is the Facility Condition Index. And this is an assessment that indicates significant or deferred maintenance. And the way to read this chart is the larger the number that it goes over, closer to 1, the worse condition that facility is in. So you can see we have a lot of facilities that are way over there. So for example, the third one down is Fire Station 3. So now a new fire station was built for that. The capital improvement plan, so the CIP document is a planning tool that's based on long-range physical planning and financial projections. So it has a detailed description of every capital project over 50,000 that is anticipated in the next 10-year period. But it's important to note that this document does not appropriate funds or authorize projects. The city council still has to initiate any project over 175,000, and then the city manager for less than 175,000. So the projects are only initiated when there's a source of funding available. And this is this is a kind of page snippet from the CIP for the facilities fund, and you can see things that are planned. Like I said, that's not authorized until it's approved by the city council. But this is what they have planned just for until 2024. And this does not, I'll point out, this does not include anything for a community center. It's not in there. And so if you look over the next 10 years that are in this CIP document, there is around $100 million of projects. And so what this fund could handle in funding these projects is about $15 million over 10 years. So, and like I said, this does not include a community center. So an additional $85 million of funding would be needed. Going over to park maintenance, these are just some information of kind of park maintenance by the numbers, like 400 picnic reservations, 7,500 ball diamonds prepped, just some of the activities that are done by park maintenance. This is our budget model that we're looking at right now. So this is with the 2021 and 2022 budget request. So the revenues are basically mostly the charges to departments, but you'll see in 22 and 23 that we have in there bond proceeds, and that's for 2 fire stations. So we will not be able to build those fire stations without issuing bonds, having debt service for those. And then their expenses are salaries, material supplies. There's debt service. On that debt service line, you can see the 2022, we were talking about that, I believe, last week, where we would pay off the debt service for the building, but then we're going to have debt service again for the fire stations. And then at the bottom of all of these models, we have the working capital balance and then the working capital goal. And so what we're hoping for is to be close to 100%, 90%. For that working capital goal. But as and as we're looking at this looks like a very healthy fund, but as you saw in the previous slides, there's a lot of need for capital improvements and facility improvements that we don't have budgeted out on here. So just further detailing out the working capital goal compared to the balance. So the goal that we had in year-end 2020, it contains, we have been setting aside basically in the levying for a certain amount every year to replace the pool vessel in 2026. And so that's at $4.5 million now. And if you recall from some of our previous meetings, we have that identified as a tool to use for our current 2020 budget shortfall. So if that does happen, which is pretty likely, that would not be part of this fund. We would take that out and we would have to issue debt in order to replace the pool vessel. So that would reduce the goal for this fund. It also reduce the working capital balance in this fund. But as we look at it right now, that's still in there. And their actual balance projected for the end of 2020 is 107% of their goal. So just some things to think about for the community to think about is how do we fund for this $85 million for the next 10 years? Do we include money in the tax levy to build cash reserves? Do we increase internal charges to departments to build cash reserves? Do we issue bonds and increase the debt service amount of the tax levy? Do we come up with some type of program, kind of similar to our pavement management program, for funding facilities? Some questions to think about. And then other policy options for facilities maintenance. There's the pool vessel. So do we continue the internal charge of $650,000 from the aquatics fund that we've been doing? It's about $650,000. Or do we for the pool vessel? Or do we reduce the aquatics fund portion of the property tax levy? So right now we have that factored into the property tax levy. And do we just make the decision that when that time comes that we will just bond for that project? That's a policy option for the committee to discuss. Also, there's options to delay capital projects, keeping in mind that, or to complete only the critical projects right now. And that's kind of the mode we're in this year. But it does lead to higher expenses in the future, and we are already falling behind with a large deferred bank of projects. And then, just how do we want to fund projects that are in the capital improvement plan? And just to note, I believe there's a facilities operation study that is going to be happening this year as well. Keep that in mind.
Cardi, before you go on, let me just go back to the pool vessel again. I just want to make clear for the committee that we've already assumed a reduction of $650,000 for next year. Is that correct? So we have not assumed that yet. So that's okay. So if the committee were to recommend to the council that the continuing funding for the pool vessel be removed, that would be a reduction in the levy of $650,000, which would be about 1%.
Yes, that is correct. Policy options for park maintenance. So, talking about service levels like the ball field condition, mowing in the parks, the parks master plan, reducing irrigation water use for athletic turf, maybe handling park trash and recycling collection in-house, expand the low mowing and native prairie areas, reducing traditional turf. So that is the end for facilities and park maintenance. And so we could take some time if you have things that you wrote down that we want to put up on our easel that we have for facilities and park maintenance. We could also, I think we can move up the Public Works Director, Carl Keel as a panelist, and then also John Bradford. And I can't see from the list who's on right now, but if the committee has questions for them, we could also talk with them that way.
So let's start by talking about this a little bit. Folks have comments or questions on what was presented so far? John?
Yes, I'm sorry. You broke up on me on that one.
No, John Locks is who I'm calling over here.
Oh.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Hey, no problem.
I was thinking maybe Mr. Keel would prioritize, give us a better sense of which projects he thinks are necessary and others that are on the cusp, and help us kind of prioritize. Might help us kind of get through the long list of different options and better come to a conclusion. And I'd like to hear what the department head has to say about that.
Okay. Carl?
Thank you, John, for the question. So the projects that you're talking about,
Can't hear him.
Carl, can you move your mouthpiece closer to you, please? Thank you.
No, still not working.
Now it's working.
That's the right thing.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. So I presume, John, you're asking about projects within the facilities fund. And those projects, the ones that are in, so we have a long list of needed projects. That's basically that bar chart, that colored bar chart that you saw. We have prioritized those and put a number of them into the draft CIP. Those are the numbers that we're showing for the next few years. In addition to that, each year we go through a process, and this year we're starting a new process to re-review those items in the CIP, and staff is developing a kind of an internal scoring system so that we can kind of prioritize those once again and reprioritize those. So really the ones that are showing in the CIP are the prioritized projects.
Mr. Chair, for a follow-up, are they necessarily, do the dollars match the priority, or are there some inexpensive ones near the top and some more expensive ones near the bottom?
I would say that they do match the priorities, and there's a large mix of them. There's many smaller ones that are identified as much needed maintenance that come out of our asset management program for facilities. Those are generally the smaller ones. The larger ones are kind of the larger projects, like the redoing of our fleet building that have been needed for many years, and those generally are the higher priorities. So I would say the largest ones are the fire stations, which are in dire need of replacement, as well as the fleet building are probably the largest ones.
Thank you.
Other questions? Josh?
Mr. Chair, members, I'm struck by whether or not the city can afford all the buildings they currently have. When I look at the level of unfunded maintenance and our current fiscal situation, I worry that we're headed to some mediocrity and that we're going to have a series of buildings that are going to slowly fall apart, and we're going to suffer, as opposed to really prioritize and make sure the quality of our infrastructure remains high. And those are tough decisions, but I think that's why we're here. So I guess I'm looking for some more options in that decision making.
John Gibbs.
Well, I don't want to interrupt the flow if someone was going to suggest options, but I sense that's sort of on the to-do list, and I appreciate the comment a lot. I've got two questions and a comment, and I just don't know how we really want to have this meeting flow, but so let me try them and just tell me, hey, later, guy. But one is a question. I'm just wondering if the city can bond for some of these projects or more of these projects rather than use the internal services funds, and whether we've scoped out that opportunity. And behind that question is just my sense that we're at such a historically low borrowing point in time, that while the history of building these internal services funds and other funds and doing some of this out of what otherwise might be general fund type money just might be better off bonded, but I know there's all sorts of issues. So sort of question one maybe doesn't demand an answer right now, but maybe, or at a future meeting. And my second one is sort of in the spirit of alignment, whether it's with Three Rivers on some of the parks and invasive issues and other things we spend, and some of the parks that Three Rivers, works out by Highland are, abutting bush and some of those things, or maybe alignment with the school district where we've got some play fields in conjunction really with school district property. Are there meaningful opportunities in the next couple budget years to align and spread some of those costs out with those agencies, or is that a fool's errand in the intermediate term? I don't know, but my gut is maybe there's some legitimate money there. And my last is in the form of a comment on the deferred maintenance. This is probably too early to say it, but I look at some of the agencies that have deferred maintenance beyond a point of catch-up. and in a space that I spend some time with respect to the parks and the trails, like I look at our DNR deferred maintenance log and amount, and I say there's no way the state of Minnesota in my lifetime will come close to catching up. And if you don't maintain something for too long, it's almost like taking it out of service. And so recognizing the challenge we're in, I just feel like I'd rather borrow a little more now and, keep up adequately than leave such a mess maybe down the line. And that's not really a question, that one. That's just I got the opportunity, so I threw it in there. So,
Mr. Chair, if I could make a few comments to Mr. Gibbs' questions. I mean, I would think that maybe I'd start with the last one, which had a question about deferred maintenance. I think the truth is that we have been underinvesting in our facilities for many decades, and we have a significant amount of deferred maintenance. So we have many buildings that we are probably spending more on now than we really should, and they ought to be replaced. So I think we have a somewhat difficult position in that we have a lot of assets, and we have not been investing enough in those assets. So I think that is true. So we have to decide whether we want to invest more in them to try to revive them, or, as was suggested, maybe we have to talk about getting rid of a few of those facilities if that's needed. With the first question having to do with bonding, the model currently includes a combination of bonding and use of fund reserves. And so generally, the smaller projects are funded through the fund reserves, through the cash balances in the fund. Larger projects are anticipated to have bonding, and then the debt service is included in the model for those projected projects. And Kari, correct me if I have that wrong.
You are correct. Thank you.
And sorry, the second question, you were breaking up quite a bit, but what I took from that was, are there opportunities with our projects to partner with other agencies to kind of share costs? Was that basically the question?
exactly. And I was specifically thinking about the parks, those that might be along the lines of what Three Rivers does, and the school district, those facilities that may be cohabitating, if you will, with school district property.
I know that has been a point of conversation. I'm not aware of any specific partnership projects that we have ongoing currently. Jamie, you may know of some.
I do not know of any current conversations. I think it is a point well taken that we should be maybe talking on this notion of alignment, which the mayor has talked an awful lot about, that perhaps we should be looking at that a little bit more than we are. I think that's a good observation. The other comment I'd make to build on Carl's comments regarding the deferred maintenance, a number of the assets on the Facility Condition Index report, that's the one with the bar charts, many of the ones that are in the worst condition have a combination of both age and also, I'd say, functional obsolescence. So for our fire stations, the design of the fire stations back in the 1960s is not the same as a design today, simply because the equipment that was being used back in the 50s and 60s was a lot smaller than the equipment that's being used today. And so those buildings actually, even if we were to retrofit them, we probably couldn't do it and still fit the apparatus into the buildings. The same is true of our current fleet garage or fleet maintenance building, where we have some pieces of equipment that we can't even fit in there because they're too long for the bays that are in place. So it's a combination of deferred maintenance and just functional obsolescence.
Any other comments or questions?
We just go back 2 slides.
Sure.
Is there like a-
Can you talk into the microphone because people can't hear
Sorry,
you?
I was just asking if you go back 2 slides to the policy options for the facilities. Okay, I just wanted to see. Sorry.
So maybe we should talk about that first item a little bit since we're back at this policy options question. So just to recap, there is an internal charge that's being used to build up a cash balance.
Correct.
Isn't that right for that?
Correct. Chair Peterson and committee members. So if you recall, when we were talking about the different pieces that make up our tax levy, a portion of that is for the aquatics fund, and I think it's around like 1.2 million. And if I remember that correctly, but part of that property tax levy that's specific for the aquatics fund is about $650,000 that is set aside that's transferred as an internal charge to the facilities fund to build up a reserve to replace that pool vessel in 2026. So if the decision was made that the entire thing, when it came time to replace that, it would all be debt service, then that would no longer need to be every year set aside.
Mm-hmm. So to state that a little bit differently, if we decide that we're going to do this, effectively, this is on the order of 1% of property taxes. That's what we're talking about here. Right. Instead of charging 1% of property taxes to save up the money for doing that, we would instead buy the pool vessel, and then future years property taxes would pay for it. That's the effect of this decision. And theoretically, is it true that we could go into that fund to get the balance that's in there too and use that for something else if we chose to, the amount that's been accumulated already?
So Chair Peterson and committee members, we've identified that right now. It's about $4.5 million to help solve our current economic crisis in 2020.
So that's already allocated for the 2020 strategy. Yes. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask the committee. I think what I want to hear is people discuss: do we want to make a policy change on this pool vessel replacement and pay for it over time when the time comes as part of our solution to the problem here? Josh.
Mr. Chair, members, Jamie, what is the guidance from public health about the pool reopening in the foreseeable future?
For this year, Mr. Chair's committee members, Josh, we are not opening the pool at all for this year. I think planning for next year will only commence once we have some clarity. We'd normally get into the really active opening preparation work in about February or March. That's when we start advertising for positions and get into hiring and such. Then John or Carl can talk about the maintenance piece of it and when they start to ramp up. I'm relatively confident that we're going to be back in business most of the way next year. I'm not too concerned about that. The big issue with the pool vessel is this question of whether you want to pay cash for it when that happens or whether you want to issue debt. I don't think I'm comfortable forecasting that in 2027 or 28 or whenever that is that we finally replace the pool vessel, that will be at record low interest rates. So I don't know if money will be as affordable as it is today. At the same time, these are the hard choices that we make, right? Whether it makes sense to stop putting aside money the way we have it in the past. Did I answer your question, Josh? Okay.
Other comments or questions on that first item on the pool vessel?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I think at some point we have to start building a fund. And this seems like an obvious one. I agree with the city manager that 5-6 years down the road, we have no idea what the interest rate is going to be. And it could be an exorbitant amount, it could be reasonable. We just don't know. So we're betting that it's going to be something the city can afford or will be forced into making afford. But I think we should start with taking this year's money and putting it towards the levy. I think that's a good starting point. And then at this point, we're not We're not capturing the funds going forward, you're just capturing the current funds.
Other comments? Maureen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this question would be for Mr. Keel. What are we dealing with as far as a timing issue on the replacement of the pool vessel? I mean, how much longer can we get away with not doing this?
I don't have a detailed answer to that. I know that it is programmed to be replaced in 2027, I believe it is. And so your question is, could we stretch that for a couple years more? I presume is your question. And I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you.
And I think just to comment on the planning process, I think the concept here is based on information they have today. That's what they're thinking is that it would be the case. Since it's an expensive thing, you want to plan. You know, just like if you know you're going to need a new driveway in a couple of years, you need to, you want to save up for it, that you want to do that. But the year may come when, you said, oh, I think we're going to need a new driveway this year. And you look at it and you say, well, it doesn't look like we're going to need that until next year. Or it might be a year before when you said it was, that you miss in the other direction and you say, oh, it looks like we need a new driveway this year when we thought it was going to be next year. So I think when the staff proposes that, I think it's kind of the middle of that sort of thing. And if it comes in a little bit early, they figure out how to string it along for another year. So looping back to this question, though, other input from folks on this regarding kind of reducing this particular deposit in the aquatics fund for next year. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of a test here. Does anybody have any objection to adding this to the list of things that we're doing? Not seeing anybody with an objection.
Have we started a list, or is this starting it?
I believe we did we add the Normandale Assessment District on? This would be the second thing on the list then.
That was about $600,000.
Yeah, and that was $600,000 there. So, okay. So then the next question is around the capital projects, and talk about that a little bit. My personal belief on this is if the city thinks that it can borrow money for super cheap, and we know we're going to borrow money to do a project, we should be looking carefully at trying to do as much as we can in the low borrowing environment, particularly since there's a lot of indication that next year might be a good year to buy construction also. And so on the capital projects, things that are funded by debt, I would tend to be in the direction of if it's something that we know we're going to buy, we should be looking at buying it sooner rather than later to capture the low construction costs and the low interest costs. Other folks input on that? Akia?
Chair, I just have a quick question. Will we be able to receive a copy of the capital improvement plan or capital projects improvement plan? Or is it published on their website? It already is there, so I'll go look for that. Then I do have a comment as well, but I guess you haven't got to the second point yet. But my question, I guess, would be, how can we prioritize the useful life of some of our facilities or, facilities. So on here we have the fire station number 4, the central maintenance, fire station number 3, which is finished, right? That's the one that's in, so we can cross that off. And then the golf course clubhouse. Is the golf course clubhouse going to fall down in 2 weeks? Or could we theoretically push this way off of our list and only do maybe central maintenance or something? We kind of talked about it before, but how critical are these critical activities up top? The first 5 or 6, I guess.
John or Carl, do you want to speak to the criticality of any of the buildings in there? None of them are in the about to fall down if we slam the door too hard condition. But you guys want to talk about that a little bit?
And maybe I have John address that. And John, if you could also speak to a little bit of the criteria that are going into the assessment system that we're putting together.
Sure. Jamie is right, is that the buildings aren't in danger of falling down. However, we do spend an inordinate amount of time with our staff resolving heating issues, HVAC issues, electrical issues in many of these buildings, simply because the buildings are 60 plus years old and not in very good shape. For many years, we have been saying that the buildings would, if you look at the central maintenance buildings, we have been talking about how those buildings are past the point where significant investment is a wise investment because they're functionally obsolete and the buildings are 60 some years old. And so for many years, we've been minimizing the amount of maintenance we've been putting in them with the understanding that eventually they would be replaced. So the kinds of critical maintenance that we're looking at is it's things like roofs and keeping things energy efficient so that we get payback on the investments that we're making, and those sorts of items that we're talking about. You know, as this is our facilities area, I always worry about deferring more because it's a very steep hill to climb as it is, and it will make it more difficult and tougher decisions down the line. As Carl was talking about the criteria, we've established a new criteria where we're going to be looking at are we able to leverage outside funds? What's the alignment? Excuse me. What's the alignment of the projects with council priorities, with other entities within the city? We have a strong sustainability component in the criteria that we're using. We're also talking about equity and inclusion in our rankings. How do the projects that we're talking about, how do those impact people who are in the BIPOC community or have other special needs? And we're in the process of developing departmental ranks. And when we get into August, we'll start doing citywide rankings of those. And at the same time, you know, I do think that one of the critical questions for us is not necessarily which projects, as we sit here today, do we defer, but more, is this kind of deferment a strategy that the committee would like us to look at more strongly?
I have a comment on that.
So,
Just a comment on that. I think as we look at this, I think there is a possible benefit to defer and be a little more strategic on when we do actually start saving and spending on these facilities, given the current state that we are in right now. It might not be to our best interest in our short term to defer, but or it would be in our best interest in our short term to defer and take advantage of having those funds to help support us through this time until we're in a more stable time to be in a position to actually complete these projects. And so for my personal thoughts, it is a good possibility that deferral is something we should be looking at as well.
Josh?
Mr. Chair, members, I want to return to my fundamental point that I made earlier, that can we afford all the public infrastructure that was built in the 1960s? And if all of it is beginning to deteriorate at a rate where everything becomes mediocre, how does that attract people to live in our community and send their kids to our schools, start businesses and whatnot? I would really urge this group to debate and look at whether or not we can afford all of the buildings that we currently have, and think about this as maybe there are some absolutely key ones that we need to invest more in because it's going to lead to a high quality of life for all residents here. And those are going to be some tough choices, and I think that's why this group is here, to help create that discussion and debate, and try to bring some consensus forward to the council. Or in 10 years, we're going to have lost this crisis, and we will have shirked our responsibility to make strategic long-term decisions. That's just my personal view and kind of one of the guiding principles that I'm bringing to the discussion. And I think everything has to be on the table as a starting point. So anyway, that's just kind of as we're beginning this debate and we're looking for options, I want to kind of help frame it up from that perspective. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Just one, I'll call on you in a second, Neil. Just one comment on here. Josh, while you were talking about kind of doing things, I kind of drew a line in the middle in this chart that we have here, just to kind of get a sense of what are the buildings that are in the top bucket versus the ones in the bottom bucket. And if I kind of go through and look at it, there's 2 that are associated with golf. There's the maintenance buildings that I'm assuming that 2 would potentially turn into 1 if we replaced it. Because those, am I right are those right next to each other, or what would the plan be, replacing that with a single building?
That was my question as well.
Yeah, there's
Too much
5
facilities.
There's 5 fire stations. I suspect that given the nature of fire service, there's probably not an opportunity to get rid of a fire station because of the locations in the service areas of the fire stations. And then you've got the community center and the health building as the 2 things. And so Josh, I understand where you're coming from on that, but when I go and just kind of draw a line and look at the things kind of above the middle on the list and say, where's there opportunities to make changes there, maybe and obviously the community center starting, saying those words out loud in the meeting is like touching the 3rd rail on the railroad track, but looking at how you go about solving the community center problem, clearly there's a demand in the community for that. And then the health building, and that as we're seeing now during the pandemic, that's performing a really important function in the community. So I think we have to look at those things, and maybe some of these functions have the opportunity to be combined together, where we have fewer buildings that we have to take care of. But I look at I don't think there's an ability to get rid of like half in there. And so that's I think the struggle that we have is, even, like if you said we're not going to have a community center, I think that's a really tough conversation to have if that's the road that we're going down, for a variety of reasons. So, and you don't have to respond. I'm just, that's my, I was just noodling on the implications of what you were saying.
Mr. Chair and committee members, if I can just jump in too, on this list, you're right, the 5 fire stations that are there, it's 4 because fire station 3 is being done. Mm-hmm. And the other 4 were just reviewed this Monday night with the city council meeting during the study session. We just concluded a fire service assessment, and the consultant took a hard look at the placement of the fire stations and confirm that, you could move 1 or 2 to pick up a little bit of coverage within the community, but generally where they're at is the right location, and the schedule that we have for replacement is the right schedule. So those were just recently studied. So this isn't really a swag at this point, and this is bringing an outside expert who works around the country to sort of validate some of the findings that we had initially. But again, it comes down to, when the resources are available to do it, and sometimes some of these will move up or down based on, the resources that are available, if it's something other than debt, just issuing geo debt, or if there's some sort of compelling need in the community. Not all of these are meeting the same purpose. We have some that are instrumental to our service delivery, like the fire stations or the central maintenance garage. And then you have some that are part of our quality of life service offerings, like the community center and the golf course and the ice garden. And so it really becomes a balancing act of, where are we serving the community? And I think it's part of the conversation this committee is going to have is, how do we balance the essential services with the quality of life services in this point of, being strategic about the future, but also having to stemming the bloodletting that's happening right now. So,
Yeah. Akia.
Thanks, Chair. Question: is it possible? So I'm looking at the CIP right now. Is it possible to get an update of what projects have been completed to date in 2020? So on here, there's a couple of priority projects, and I feel like a couple of them have already been done. Like the dog park parking lot has been redone already, and then the fire station's complete, and a couple other ones. So is there a completed list of what
we can do that. Yep.
Okay. Then I had another question, but I just forgot it. But in skimming through this and talking about the quality of life, it looks like between now and 2024, excuse me, the golf courses and the ice garden have like a total of $12 million in improvements that need to be made. So that's something I guess we should probably think about, because that's a lot of money for quality of life activities and a couple other things. But yeah, this is just a comment. But the request was for the updated list too. So
Yeah,
thanks.
just to plant a seed on the quality of life things. The interesting kind of trade-off on that is when you hear from the kind of real estate professional community on the impact that the quality of life things have on the desirability of the community. And it doesn't take a whole lot of kind of swing in the value of homes for that number to dwarf the kind of dollars per year numbers that we're talking about in when we're in here. So obviously you can turn that argument over and justify spending whatever amount of money you want in order to, and we're going to have every amenity known to mankind in the community. But, if we do get to the point of kind of making permanent decisions, and when we're talking about facilities like this and getting rid of them, we're talking about kind of permanent decisions, not temporary decisions. I think we have to look very carefully at that because making sure that, in particular, one of the things that I've always had as a priority is making sure that Bloomington continues to be a place that people want to bring their family to and kind of grow a family, because I think that's a lot of what makes a community like ours work, is getting seniors to be able to sell their houses to that new generation of families, and they feel comfortable coming to our community, and they're going to have the sorts of things that their kids want to do in the community. So, other comments or questions? John.
Mr. Chair and members, a couple of these facilities do generate income. And so what it would cost to replace them or to have significant maintenance is significantly offset by service fees and other things. So this is a good list, but there are some factors on a few of these. Like the golf course is fairly close to a zero. It costs a little bit, but it's a lot less than it used to be in years past. Ice garden creates a little bit of income and so on. So there's a few of these that don't match 100% investment. It's maybe only a 5 or 10 or 15% investment because of what it's generated. So I think we have to keep that in mind too, that these are not all created equal.
I saw Chris's hand over there.
Yeah, I hate to disagree with the esteemed chief, but our ice garden and our golf courses are just bringing in enough money to cover their operating costs. So they have no capacity to pay back debt for a capital improvement.
Okay.
And is it eligible to do that? I thought in like a meeting or two, Jamie said that we couldn't make a profit off of like the ice garden or something. Were we talking about that?
Can you ask the question again, Akia?
I think so. We're breaking even, excuse me, even with our fees for like the ice garden. But excuse me, sorry. I felt like a couple weeks ago in a meeting, you said that we couldn't make a profit off of the fees we charge, right?
The comment you're remembering is related to the fees that we have for things like building permits and those types of services that we provide, where there has to be what's referred to as a nexus between the cost for the service and the cost to provide the service and what we charge. So it doesn't apply necessarily to the enterprise operations. When we look at the pricing for ice time at the garden or greens fees at the golf course, we spend much more time looking at the competitive market around us and what whether the cities or other facilities are charging. because those are enterprise operations. We run them like businesses.
John and then Neil.
Actually, I think Neil might have been. Could I
Neil,
yield?
Neil and then
Neil, I
John
think
then.
he had
Well,
his-
again, just to pick up, we need to see that CIP because most of the things we're talking about are in that CIP. And then I'm assuming also that all of the items on this list all make a contribution to a reserve, i.e., like we just whacked from the pool.
John and Carl or Kari, can you speak to whether each of those facilities have a facilities charge associated with them?
So I would say that our facilities fund, the space and occupancy charges that we're charging generally to all the users, cover the cost primarily of ongoing maintenance and kind of smaller capital items. If they need to have a new boiler or a new roof or those types of things. It does not include enough fees to cover new facilities. So those larger items on that list are not funded, or there's not monies being set aside currently to fund the majority of those projects.
John.
Thank you. This is a great conversation from my perspective, by the way. This is helping me a lot. I am sensitive to the notion about deferral and when and picking it up. And I'm getting back to looking at this list and seeing some of these are more naturally potential alignment opportunities and others less so. And I'm wondering in this, do we do it now? Does it defer? This is even before you get to the do we borrow or spend from one of these internal funds question. If one way to look at this is maybe we defer while we explore some alignments. So it's maybe off the real hit list for the next couple of years, but maybe a little nudge to looking to whether, for example, Creekside, are there some opportunities to align with the county library system or some of the other nonprofit or for-profit recreational things that might just mitigate against some of that challenge? Or with respect to golf, we've got Three Rivers, we've got 4 golf courses running at a profit at this point. I don't know if some piece of that mission can be achieved less expensively by some alignment with that golf system. I look at the health building and we talked about how the counties, and I know we're going to deal with health a little later, but it strikes me that there may be some alignment opportunities in the public health area that might suggest let's defer some of that expense for right now. At least it would be responsible to defer while we explore those alignments. And maybe there's some money in that. That's not going to solve this whole problem, but it feels to me in the sphere of prioritizing, maybe that's a way to look at what we might think about deferring.
Other comments? So on that question, is there some specific decision that the staff is, or feedback or input on the delaying question that the staff is looking for at this point?
I can jump on that one. I don't think that tonight we need a decision about whether or not we're delaying or not delaying. I think an outcome that we would like through your process is developing an asset management plan and some recommendations around the longer term problem of the $85 million hole. There isn't a building that you can't limp along for another year or 2 years because of the situation we're in. And so as I say that, there probably is a place for some deferral and some investment. But over the longer term period, how do we, the hole that we have plays into our whole future fiscal plan.
And Mr. Chair, as a committee member, I'd agree with John in terms of what we'd need for tonight. I think the conversation has been good in terms of trying to maybe get to some point at the next conversation when we're actually talking about some maybe policy decisions about understanding the balance of the essential services and the quality of life services, because I think there's a lot of merit to both the arguments, right? That we want to be attracting people to Bloomington and making sure that we have the amenities that are necessary to do that. I would maybe go back to what Carl said about the projects that are funded through the facilities fund itself. Most of the projects that we've gravitated towards discussing on the facilities condition index are replacement projects. They're bigger ticket items. They're ones that we would be issuing debt for. I think the real thing that staff will need to do is maybe take some of this conversation and go back and have another look at the facilities fund to see if the projects that we're planning to fund through that set aside are ones that we can defer, and what impact that would have on operations. To the point that Carl made about the space and occupancy charges just providing for the general maintenance, that's probably what we'll want to look at, is how we control those facility chargebacks to the departments by deferring some projects in the next couple of years. So I think from this conversation, staff will go back and take a look at that and come back with some recommendations at a later date then.
So just one follow-up comment to Jamie's comment there is that, looking at this list, it's pretty clear for the next decade or two for projects that are funded out of the facilities fund. And remember, in the capital improvement plan, that's a slice of the capital improvement plan. It's not the whole thing. So we're just talking about this particular fund. But for things that are paid for out of this fund, as a city, we're going to be spending, a bunch of money over the next 10 or 20 years on things like that. And I don't think our charge as a committee is to chop and get things to be as low as possible for next year. I think I've always thought of our charge as making a reset so that the city's kind of expense posture is aligned with the revenue that we think we can do, and that things are ordered so that we can kind of grow our way out of that. And I think it's within our conversation to have a conversation about this and say, we want to make sure that there's the right amount of money available for these replacement projects so that over that 10 or 20 year period, we're delivering the lowest cost over that time period. And it's not necessarily about over optimizing for saving money over the next year or two, but we can just as much be setting a table for that long-term sort of thing. And so maybe if we decide that that's the case, we may choose to continue the course on some of this work in the short run and decide that we're going to economize in other areas because we think over the long term that's the right thing to do for the city. That's a balance I think we need to strike as a committee. Other comments or questions? Okay, onward.
All right.
Oh, just a second. How are we doing on what we agreed on time?
We're a little over.
We're a little over.
Quite a
was
bit.
thinking maybe we want to do the break now.
You want to do the break now?
Because we've been at it for almost 2 hours.
Okay.
Kari, does that work for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. We will do a break and we'll start back up let's do it at 8:25.
Okay.
Okay. a critical mass of people back. So next up for our conversation is a conversation on the fleet fund. Let's go ahead with that.
All right. So the fleet fund also in the Public Works Department. And this fund pays for the costs that are related to the operations and the maintenance, repair, and replacement of the city vehicles and equipment. And so the departments are charged for vehicles and equipment used by their department. And recently, as I mentioned earlier, they just very recently completed a in-depth service assessment of the fleet division. And so part of their operating expenses were reduced recently. They reduced from 15 full-time employees down to 12. And then their other expenses are materials, supplies, and services. They do have some internal charges. And then, of course, a large expense of this fund is the purchase of vehicles. So the charges are based on the maintenance and replacement costs and based on the vehicles. And in the past, there was just one fleet equipment charge that the departments would see on their line item budgets. And beginning with this 2021 budget, Michael Keim, who is on WebEx tonight and will be available for questions here in a few minutes, went through and split out those fleet charges between fleet equipment maintenance and repairs, and then also the replacement, so that the replacement and then the maintenance are separate and more transparent. Here is the split of the internal charges that are charged out to departments, and you can see it is predominantly Public Works, and then also police has a large portion of the fleet charges. And so kind of by the numbers, they have 600 units and 250 attachments that are serviced and maintained, and 18,645 hours annually. There are now 9 full-time technicians, and they have a $4.9 million operational budget and $2.5 million replacement budget. And so recently, just wanted to highlight some things that they have done recently to increase their efficiency. And so they reduced the number of units from 650 down to 600.
Hey, Kari, when you say unit, can we think of that as a vehicle, or what does that represent? Yes, I believe that is a vehicle. I don't know, if, Michael, if you're available to answer that question.
Yes. Whoa. It is vehicles or mowers or heavy equipment. Basically, anything that has an engine and operates under its own is considered a unit.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael. So combined warehouse and parts operation to eliminate redundancies, outsourced our parts procurement, eliminating, that was how we were able to eliminate 3 full-time employees, our positions. And then reduced operational costs from $5.4 million with that change down to $5.2 million. And then, as I said before, Michael revamped the chargeback system based on the service recommendations, and it's more transparent now so that the departments that use this service can make better fiscal decisions to reduce their internal charges. So here's some of the challenges, and we talked about this a little bit in the facility presentation. So they're operating in an outdated and undersized facility. So it's been identified. It was identified as a safety hazard by a consultant in 2014, and then more recently, identified as undersized by a consultant in 2019. So it causes inefficiencies. So both studies recommended right-sizing the building to improve safety and also hiring 2 more full-time technicians to reduce the outsourcing needs. And so again, with this fund, the vehicle replacement schedule is lagging. And so funding has not been adequate to replace units when scheduled, which results in higher operational costs and more vehicle downtime. Here we have the kind of long-term, this is the budget model for the fleet and equipment fund. So there, you can see their revenues there with the maintenance charges to departments. replacement charges to departments. There's also some revenue. There's vehicle auctions. We do sell some of the equipment and vehicles, so there's some revenue outside revenue there. And then it's wages and benefits, material supplies, internal services, and then the capital, the vehicle equipment expenses. The working capital goal is in the goal for the reserve for this fund. We have a month of operating expenses to kind of give some flexibility. Fuel contingency if fuel prices increase drastically, and then the biggest part is the equipment replacement reserve. And so currently at the end of 2020, there were early on in the year, there were some planned capital expenses for 2020 that we're going to be deferring until 2021. So we're looking at being a little higher than our goal at the end of 2020. But those will need to be purchased eventually. So some policy options to discuss. There are still opportunities to further downsize the number of units in the fleet, reduce redundancies by consolidating fleet operations, and continue to replace combustion engines with electric vehicles when they make sense. And that was very quickly the fleet fund. Are there any questions about the fleet fund that you'd like more information that Michael can address?
We'll start with John.
Just a simple one. I just want to understand this. So is that $2.5 million replacement budget, is that an annual contribution of $2.5 million every year on replacement, or is that a kind of a rolling balance? I was having trouble with that.
That is a rolling balance. Basically, that's the fund that the equipment is bought out of, and then the department that gets the vehicle pays that back with interest, so that the fund stays at the right level.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question about how do you measure utilization and make decisions around that? And in particular, I've heard in the community conversations from folks like, 600 vehicles seems like a lot of vehicles, kind of criticisms like that. What's the decision-making process for deciding, we don't use something like this often enough, so we're going to go rent it when we need it. We use these. Do we need 3 of them rather than 4 of them? How long do we keep them? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We are pretty much a pass-through operation. So, like if, like the BEV vehicle, they added a vehicle, so we have to maintain that one. If, say, like one of the earlier options that was presented under the facilities and parks was if they let more grassland grow, then they would have less mowers for that. As far as utilization, we do track utilization. That was a big push for us, making our billing system a bit more transparent so that the departments can make better decisions. Ultimately, though, it is up to the department to determine whether they need the vehicle or not. It's in their budget. We are here to support them. I don't know their job to tell them whether they do or don't need something. I can only show them the numbers of what it costs them to do that.
Although I would note that we do highlight for departments underutilized vehicles if they're not putting on many mileage, and we try to guide them as best we are able to give them some guidance.
Other questions? John?
Mr. Chair and committee members, I sat on a committee several years ago that I think it's good for the committee to know that a lot of the fleet sat outdoors, and that shortens the length of a vehicle. And so we built facilities so virtually 100% of the maintenance fleet, police vehicles, public works, all those were stored indoors. And they said, depending on the vehicle, it can add 1 or 2 years to the useful life of the vehicle. And in a fleet this size with 650 vehicles, that was pretty significant. So it kind of gets back to that, what do we cut and is there an efficiency in doing a certain thing that will extend the life? And I'm not sure I'm sitting with enough information to make those kind of decisions, but there are things that have been done to extend the life of the fleet that the committee may not know about.
But it sounds to me like the opportunity, if the fleet is not the right size, is that conversation has to happen at the kind of general fund department budget level, not at the fleet fund level, is what I heard. Other questions or comments? Okay.
Moving on. Okay. Thank you, Michael. All right. So the Information Technology Department is all contained in the Information Technology Fund, which is an internal service fund. And the IT department provides the city with computer hardware, software, coordinates the networking and communications of the system in accordance with the city's long-range information technology plan. And supports 175 servers, more than 280 software applications, 1,200 laptops, desktops, and printers, 26 sites, and 20 miles of installed fiber. And IT services affect the public by providing a better experience for events and services. And they, support the services departments and also the departments that interact then with outside customers on a regular basis. So here's just specifically some of the ways in which the IT department, this is an internal service fund, but they directly affect the public. So extending public Wi-Fi at city facilities, ensuring technology is accurately configured at the WIC clinic, the Women, Infant, Children Clinic, providing wireless service for the weekly farmers market in the summer, providing GIS mapping services, which are made available on the city's website, providing networking and technical support for artistry groups that use the building, and then providing streamlining capabilities for public events at Bloomington Ice Garden. Some examples. So the IT department completed a review of the structure of their services and personnel in 2018, and metrics were identified to help understand the composition of the budget in comparison to other local governments. So the numbers in 2018 indicated that we were within a normal range for IT expenses compared to the total budget and the number of IT employees to the total full-time employees. However, the average IT spend per employee was significantly higher than other local governments. And this result was likely due to redundant software applications, which caused the cost of our software maintenance to be higher. So since 2018, we've begun to evaluate the city's software application portfolio. And an IT steering committee was created internally with representatives from different departments across the city and have identified redundant applications to determine whether or not we can create opportunities to reduce the number of applications being used. And another notable change is that there are now fewer IT employees overall. So for their operating expenses, there's the staff salaries and benefits. So part of the assessment of the IT department, there used to be IT employees that were under the Public Works Department, and those are now all under the IT department. We moved 4 full-time Public Works IT employees to the IT department. So for the 2020 budget, there were 18 full-time and 2 part-time employees, and some were still in the Public Works budget. For the 2021-2022 budget requests, that has been reduced to 17 full-time and 1 part-time, and they are all within the IT budget. So they do also have material supplies, services, internal charges, annual software maintenance is a big expense for this fund, and then new software purchases. And then, of course, capital outlay, computer hardware, servers. So the charges changed in 2021 budget. So in the past, they were the allocations were based on whether the number of laptops or desktop that the department had. And so as the IT steering committee kind of looked into how that was charged out and talked about all of the technology that employees use at the city, even if they're not sitting in front of a computer all day, the jobs are such where technology is used in all the jobs at the city. So it changed kind of to make it more straightforward and simplify, and to charge out the cost of IT across departments, not just for the ones that are just using the laptop or the desktop, because there's so much more to what the IT department does. So here is the kind of split out, and you'll see it's very heavily Public Works, Police Department, also Community Development. This fund, as you'll see, so this is their kind of 5-year look for a long-term budget model. And what you will see for their working capital balance, this fund has struggled, this internal service fund has struggled in recent years, and to have enough internal charges to support it. And so just this look that we're looking at here, and part of this is moving all the Public Works employees, or not all of them, moving the IT Public Works staff under the IT umbrella to making it more transparent that this is the total cost of IT. And then also, over the years, we've had to make transfers from like the Strategic Priorities Fund, or if we had a year where we had positive budget variance in the general fund, some of that excess working capital can be transferred to help the IT fund. So it has been an issue of having the correct charges to support the true costs of IT for the city. And so one of the things that we'll talk about as an option is, I think back in 2014, we replaced our ERP financial HR payroll software, and the Strategic Priorities Fund transferred or had an interfund loan to the IT fund, and that was paid back about I think 600,000 of that, or 650,000 of that has been paid back, but there's still 600,000 left. And to try to work that into this model and not make the charges to departments increase greatly, it keeps kind of getting pushed out. So we've had discussions internally that there's been other things that have been that the Strategic Priorities Fund has transferred money to help in different areas, like for example, like in the fire pension fund, where it was not an interfund loan, and it might make sense for just that, not to have that be the rest of it be an interfund loan, but just that was a transfer, and we can kind of move on. So if you look at the end of 2019, on this slide, the working capital balance line, we kind of have it color coded. So if it's in good shape, we color coded as green. If it starts going below 90% of the goal, it starts turning red. And you can see in 2020 it's red, and then 21 and forward it's getting very red. So, but for projected 2020, it's at 79% of the goal. And so what we have in that goal is an amount for capital expenses, software expenses, a month of operating expenses, and then some money that there were some fairly major fiber projects that were done, and money was set aside from or internally charged from other departments that use the fiber, like utilities and communications, and a lot of things were accomplished, and there's sort of a remaining amount of almost $175,000 that's still in there. So here's some policy options for the committee to discuss. And we do have Amy Cheney, the Chief Information Officer, is on the call, on the WebEx meeting. And there she is. And so I just talked about that interfund loan from Strategic Priorities. If if we think we need to eventually pay that back, that's what's being currently modeled out. And the committee might have an interest in assisting with evaluation of services that maybe the IT department hasn't offered in the past or would consider expanding. And another thing to think about is reducing volatility in the IT budget by moving to subscription services rather than increasing capital spend. And I think, yeah.
What does that mean?
So with that, I'll turn it
Can you
over.
explain? I don't understand when you say you're going to put it into a subscription service. What does that mean?
Amy, would you like to answer that question?
Sure, chairs, members of the committee. What we're talking about is really our software. And so when we're talking about subscription, we're talking about cloud services. So currently we have a mix of cloud services and what we would call on-premise software. And so the strategy would be to move to more cloud-based applications in the future.
Other comments or questions? John?
Sort of like that last one, I get that might level out and address the volatility, but is it useful to put another bullet there about outsourcing big pieces? I mean, is there money to be saved by outsourcing some of this IT or a lot of this IT service, or is that just not?
It's certainly something that we can consider. We do. We are part of a consortium already called Logis. So we are sort of sharing in costs with other agencies by using Logis as a source. Our public safety, for example, is through Logis, and then our phone system, and they also provide some networking services. So, you know, that's how other cities are sort of handling that, by using a consortium model.
Yeah. Other comments or questions? Not seeing any. You can go ahead, Kari.
Just curious if there's any feedback on that interfund loan, like what your thoughts are on that from the strategic priorities.
Is the idea on that you would buy down the cost of this for some period of time and then pay it back, or what's the theory on that?
The theory would be proposing to the council that that loan would be forgiven, this outstanding amount. So there's about, I think it's like 600,000, 650,000. So it would be internal, but this IT fund that is struggling would not have to model out having to pay that money back to the Strategic Priorities Fund.
So I'm trying to connect this to the one of the three deliverables and the benefit it delivers that way.
So if we leave it where we need to pay that back, it affects the charges to the departments, which then those departments that are charged, they are funded by the property tax levy. So it has the effect of, if we need to increase the IT charges to be able to pay that back, then especially the departments that have activities in the general fund with IT charges, they would have an increased property tax need.
Okay. John?
Well, Mr. Chair, that really appeals to me, because it feels to me like if you can do that, I don't want to be pejorative about this, but it almost feels like this amounts to almost an over-reserve from somewhere else. It seems like there's funds. If that can be achieved, that feels like real low-hanging fruit to me. Am I missing something?
I don't, Mr. Chair and committee members, John, I don't think you're missing something here. And that's why I think staff is leaning towards that recommendation, because it doesn't make sense right now to have that payback in place if it's gonna cost taxpayers dollars. The Strategic Priorities Fund it's a fund that's been set up for the council to utilize for special projects or strategic priorities that pop up. And it's been used in a number of different ways. So over the last couple of years, an example is they allocated about $750,000 a year to some to what we call a neighborhood emphasis program or neighborhood support program in Northeast Bloomington. So we could put more resources into that area to support low interest home loan or home improvement loans, those types of things, things that are consistent with their strategic priorities. And all the way that this transfer is set up or the payback from IT is set up would just go back into that fund for the council to use. And that fund is healthy compared to a number of the other funds.
Other comments or questions? I'm going to float the idea here then that we're interested in kind of doing this loan forgiveness and doing that. Anybody have an objection to that?
No.
Not seeing a whole lot of objection to that. That one is, now we got 3 things on the list. So we could be done tonight.
What's the amount?
How much money is this?
So the amount that the IT fund needs to pay back is around like $600,000, but it's not a direct savings to the tax levy. It's just helping their model overall. They were going to pay that back in the future, and it was spread out over a long time. So it's not going to have a big impact like the other 2 things, but I think it does have an impact.
Yeah. So in the model, is it would it be safe to say it's closer to $100,000 and $600,000, closer to $200,000, $600,000?
I can find out for sure exactly.
Okay. Yeah, if we could get that answer, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. All right. Move on.
Any other comments on any of the other things on the list there? So just in the purpose of disclosure, I'm specifically not commenting on the 3rd thing because that's the very business that I work in. So I'm not expressing an opinion about that. It would be up to other committee members to talk about that one.
And I just have a comment or a statement that's tangent to this. Because of our new work environments, I guess I would highly support making sure that we have all of the IT security and type risk assessments to make sure we're safe as a agency, or the city is safe as an agency working from home with private information. So if that is an additional expense, I feel like we should make sure that's supported from the budget office or from your team, Amy.
Do you have anything you want to add to that, Amy?
No, just so you know that we do have a very good security posture, and we're continually evaluating it. And we do have some money set aside in our strategic plan initiatives for this year to do a little extra as well.
Thank you.
Any other comments here? John?
Because you won't comment on it. I'd love Amy's view, but my sense is the world is moving towards what we're calling subscription services here. It strikes me it will be expensive over time to be counter to the trend. Is that a safe observation, or is that ignorance?
Council just did it.
I agree. That is a safe observation. However, we do have some legacy systems that we have to be cautious that we don't go too fast so that we're able to keep those integrations. We have so many lines of business that we can't just assume that that's the direction we're going to go for everything. So we're continually evaluating it.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. All right. The next internal service fund is the insurance fund. And we have Amy Larson, who's the risk and litigation manager on the WebEx. And so this fund pays for all the costs, including premiums and losses related to these types of insurance. So workers' compensation, general liability, automobile, property, and then we do have some miscellaneous policies for fireworks, medical, and liquor. So workers' compensation is self-insured. So for actual costs of claims up to $500,000 per claim. So if multiple claims are presented and are not related to the same incident, a $500,000 self-insured retention will be paid for each claim. And claims over $500,000 are covered by the WCRA, which is the Workers' Compensation Reinsurance Association. So departments are charged premiums for workers' compensation through the payroll process based on employees' workers' comp codes. And those, so depending on the type of job that the employee has, some are inherently riskier than others, and there's more of a internal charge to the insurance fund, you know, like a police officer compared to an accountant. So that happens every 2 weeks through payroll, and that's audited every year as well. And then the general liability insurance. So the insurance purchased through the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust. And the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust is a trust that's made up of the majority of cities in the state. And it's like it's a pool, so that they can keep costs stable. And so when some cities are having good years, it helps other ones that are having bad ones. And if everyone has a good year, we do get a dividend. There's, for general liability, there is a $100,000 deductible. And so annually, departments pay a percentage of the premium for that to the league based on their total losses. Plus, they receive a chargeback for actual losses that are paid by the insurance fund, and that's prorated over 5 years. Automobile insurance is also purchased through the league, and there's a $50,000 deductible. And the premium for this coverage is charged to the fleet fund. So Michael Keim that we just were talking to earlier, it's that fund. And then individual departments do receive a chargeback for actual losses, automobile losses, prorated, again, over 5 years. And then property insurance, also through the league, $50,000 deductible. And the majority of the premium for this coverage is then charged to the facilities fund that we looked at first this evening. And again, losses charged back to the departments over 5 years. And then these are just those miscellaneous insurance policies. So fireworks has a $100,000 deductible, just a small premium, and that's just charged to Parks and Recreation. The medical professionals is charged to public health. And then there's a liquor liability for the golf. So here's again a split. You'll kind of see a trend where you see, in a lot of these, the big users or the ones that have big charges are Public Works and Police, which are large departments, the city, also Parks and Rec and Community Development. So here is the long-term model for the insurance fund, and you will notice. So for the working capital balance, you know, we've got at the top are the revenues, and these are the internal charges that go out to the departments. So for workers' comp, general liability, automobile, property, and those internal revenues. And then the expenses are going to be the premiums and claims that are paid out, and accruals for claims. And then the working capital balance for the like for 2019, you can see it's looking very healthy. And then we have our working capital goal, and what we've had in there. So for like 19 and 20, we had 1.8 million, right, and a reserve for workers' compensation. I was saying we were self-insured up to the 500,000, but if there's multiple claims, those are multiple 500,000. So we have, not really knowing what is going to happen with the COVID pandemic and with workers' compensation, we have increased that quite a bit. So that's something to look at. And so it was at 1.8 million, and we have it now at almost 3.6 million. And then we have some other in our working capital goal for general liability, automobile, and property. And so we can talk a little bit more about that and kind of the risks that we have with Amy here in a second. But I do have a trivia question, is how much money since 1986 does the city estimate it has saved by being self-insured for workers' compensation? So A, 300,000, B, 3 million, C, 30 million, or D, 300 million. Does anyone want to make a guess?
C.
30 million.
30 million is correct. C. So with that, I'll kind of maybe turn it over to Amy Larson. And if you have questions for Amy, the Risk and Litigation Manager, or anything you want to expand on, Amy?
No, Corey, you did a very nice job. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Kari or for Amy on this particular topic? John?
I've only tangentially been watching the liability legislation related to COVID claims. So I forget where it lands for local governments or like, so I'm just wondering how solid or soft are those projections relative to COVID related claims?
If, Kari, if you can go back to that slide, please. What we had done was originally we were estimating somewhere in the neighborhood of, at the least a $12,000 to $15,000 estimate for any COVID related claims we would have for first responders. So what we did was we added about $2.5 million to our current projection, and the $1.8 million was actually projected out by an actuarial study that we had performed approximately 4 years ago. We are due to do another actuarial study, but we increased our working capital goal in workers' compensation by about $2.5 million so that we could cover any workers' compensation claims that would come through from our first responders. Now, what happened was that we were able to, or the legislators came back and they had determined that instead of having COVID-related workers' comp claims for first responders be individual claims, that we were going to be able to actually count them as one claim. And so while that may have lessened our exposure from a numbers standpoint, we still don't know enough about what the side effects or what the lasting effects are going to be for anyone who would actually get COVID-19. And so at this point in time, we have continued, or we've maintained the additional funding in this for the working capital goal in workers' comp, just so that we can make sure that we can potentially meet any of our claims responsibilities. Still hanging out with the legislature, though, is whether or not we are going to be able to transfer anything above our $500,000 to the workers' compensation reinsurance fund as a one-time or for workers' comp claims related to COVID-19. And we think that it shouldn't make a big difference, because if we are able to count them as one, our self-insured retention for workers' compensation is the $500,000, but that is yet to be seen. Does that answer the question?
Yep.
Other questions on the insurance fund, workers' comp, or the other areas? Okay, not hearing anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
So during the break, we had talked about maybe stopping after that one, but I think we
we still got some time
gained
here.
some
so
time here. So
yeah.
should we just keep trucking through?
Keep rolling along. That's why I didn't bring it up yet, as
Okay.
I saw we were making good
Okay.
time there. So
Sounds good. I've been trying to go fast. Okay. All right. So next, internal service fund is a smaller one. The amount of internal charges and fund balance. It's the support services fund. And so what that covers is the mailroom, the print shop, and the information desk. And this is part of the community services department, and specifically in the communications division is where that falls under. So the print shop, mailroom, information desk functions provide services to all the departments in the city, and their activities are supported by user fees. There's just one full-time employee who's in the print shop. there's 2 part-time employees who do the mail services for the city, and then we have 2 part-time employees at the information desk. And here they are. And the mailroom sorts 350 pieces of mail a day. Print shop was established in 1959, and the information desk, as a side note too, along with when the city, buildings are open during, regular business hours, also is there for the Center for the Arts attendance, and that traffic totals on evenings and weekends 72,000 people annually in a normal, year. And so the way those are charged out is the print shop charge is not an allocation. All of the other things that we've been talking about this evening with internal service charges are determined in allocation, and that's budgeted, and that is what is charged out based on budget. Whereas the print shop is that internal revenue is based on actual jobs to departments. But then the mailroom is kind of based on departments' use of postage and mail service, and then the information desk is supported by phone charges, and phone charges are maintained, like Amy Cheney was talking about. We have our system through Logis, but the IT heavily supports that, and so those phone charges are an internal charge, and 35% of that revenue that kind of funds the information desk, based on the phones that each department has. So here's how those are split, all those support services across the city. So we got like 18% Public Works, Police Department 15, Parks and Rec 15, a little more evenly split. And then, as I said, this is a smaller budget, and it's very healthy. So the charges are around, $500,000 annually. And then there's the wages, benefits, material supplies, and, their fund balance is very healthy, but also, overall small. It's little. So at the end of 2020, we're projecting around $170,000. That's all I had for the support services. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. What would the impact be in that 2021 budget request if we took the working capital balance down to the goal? What if we decided to do that?
It would be about what's the difference there? Like
I can do the math. I'm just wondering the implications of that.
Yeah, so 60,000 spread out over all the departments, and the percentage that would be general fund.
It's 1/10%.
Yeah, it's very. So like I said, this is a small one. We want to be complete and give you all the information of our funds, but this is a very small one.
I think we're kind of looking around for things. I don't know if we're at the $60,000 level yet right now, but
right.
I think that one we need to file that one away as a potential place to get a little bit of money.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Not seeing any.
Okay. So the next two are kind of in the administration department and our human resources division. And I don't know, Chris, if you want me to talk through these, or if you would like to, or just go ahead. Or if you want to go, maybe just to hear a different voice. Or okay.
Chris, I don't know that your microphone is on.
Oh, thank you.
That's much better.
So we have a package of benefits that we provide to our employees that are consistent across all of our departments. They're determined at a citywide HR level, and so we provide health insurance, dental, life, long-term disability insurance, a health club reimbursement benefit, and a tuition reimbursement benefit. So this is our core package of employee insurance benefits. We also provide a pension through the Public Employees Retirement Association and paid time off benefits. And the paid time off ones will be covered in the next fund. But the way we run this fund is we charge a per FTE charge to each department. So for 2021, it's going to be $17,510 per FTE. So that's the annual charge, and it automatically gets pulled from each department's budget in a 1/12 increment every month to cover the cost of providing benefits to that employee. We used to charge the departments specifically for their employees. So if you had 5 employees that had single health insurance and 8 employees that had family health insurance, we did that every year to figure out how much of the insurance bill would get charged to that department. That was wreaking some havoc on our smaller departments. If they'd have 2 employees switch to family insurance, then their budget would see a notable increase and so on. And so since our departments really don't have any control over this particular cost, it's managed at a central level, we went with a central charge. So the revenue in is that FTE charge out to each department, and then the expenditures pay the city's share of those employee benefit premiums. So this fund was looking a lot uglier at this time last year. We received a significant increase in our health insurance offer from Medica, who we'd been with for many years, which drove us out into the marketplace looking for more affordable options. And at the suggestion of one of our employees, we looked into something called the Public Employees Insurance Program, which is sort of a statewide collaborative that any city, county, or public entity can join for their employees. We refer to it as PEEP. And so we switched to PEEP as of the 1st of this year. We're hoping that it's going to provide us with much more stable health insurance rates over the years. Their history has been much more modest, consistent increases rather than some fairly wild swings that the city had been seeing. We saw, within a 3-year span, we would see a decrease and then a 20% increase. And so it was getting pretty tough to manage and budget for. So we are now in a much larger pool, a risk pool, combined with public employees for lots of other agencies and jurisdictions. And we expect that that's going to bring us some degree of stabilities. It is a 2-year deal, so we will definitely have this insurance for our employees for 2021 because we signed a 2-year contract last fall, headed into this year. So this fund is looking a little over $1 million better than it was last time. We won't get our premium increase for 21 until Kari's got the end of September. I'm still crossing my fingers for the middle of September. But right now we are budgeting for a 5% increase as our best guess.
And so one thing I'll add, when we were doing the budget last year, we were making some assumptions of how employees might change their plans based on new options because it was a completely different plan. And we underestimated how many of the employees would go towards the lower premium plans, which are they're higher risk, higher deductible, but they're lower premium plans than anticipated. So it's looking like that we'll have a much larger gain in this fund than we were anticipating, which we were happy about.
Going back to that last slide, so again, kind of continuing the theme here, assuming the premiums come in at the level that we're budgeting, how much of that $1 million gain is available, like in a fund balance that might be available to be used?
So I don't know if do you want to?
Am I doing my
answer?
math correctly? It looks like we have about $1.6 million above our working capital in here.
Okay.
Another thought to keep in mind is the more we can preserve that balance, that charge to departments, we can hopefully keep flat for multiple years and use that as a long-term strategy. It's been going up for a number of years. So, Kari, I don't know. Looks like we're projecting a flat charge to the departments for 21 and 22.
Yes, that is correct.
And the pie chart there just basically reflects the distribution of our FTEs, because this is a direct head count type of charge. The more FTEs you have, the more you pay.
John?
So, Mr. Chair, it strikes me there either is real money here or maybe no money here. But if there's a 1.17 roughly somehow ahead of the game relative to 2020, and there was a flat budget, would we not see 1.17 the next year as well? In other words, are we at 2.25 or something like that over a 2-year period, or is that not the right way to look at this?
We're just spending down our fund balance, because if you look at this, our revenues look like they would slightly exceed our expenses in 21, but then in 22 our revenues are below our expenses, and they continue to be so. I don't know if he's still on the line, but Carl Keel, who you spoke with earlier, always talks about eating our seed corn. So that's, we have that potential, but that's what we would be doing, because our expenses do outstrip our revenues.
With that explanation, my eyesight is such, I'm not seeing any of that, so I was locked into the 1 point. Thank you.
So this, like all the other funds, this fund does have a working capital goal. It's a 1 month of operating expenses, and then a reserve for future premium increases. Again, we try to be able to flatten any spikes that go out to our departments by using this fund to manage sort of the peaks and valleys. We talk almost exclusively about health insurance when we talk about this fund, but we do have our other benefits that were listed on the first slide in here. And it's worth noting that for dental insurance, while it's a much smaller dollar amount, we are self-insured. So we direct pay the benefits on our dental insurance. So another reason to have some cushion in this fund. Any questions about how we pay for those insurance benefits and how we budget for them?
Not seeing any questions. You can go ahead.
So our second HR-related internal service fund is called the Accrued Benefits Fund. And this one has to do with the time off benefits that we provide to our employees. So this fund is not used for day-to-day payment to employees. Like if, I take a couple of days of vacation and I get paid vacation time on my paycheck, this isn't what this is for. This is us having the money to fund the liability we have on the books. So our auditors and government finance accounting standards call for cities and jurisdictions to fund these types of liabilities. In a perfect world, they would like to see us at 100% funded, which means we could lock the doors of the city of Bloomington tomorrow. We could part ways with all of our employees, and we would have cash on hand to write everybody a check for all of the hours that they have banked up. We're never quite there, but we're pretty darn close. So first, the money comes into this fund because we charge each department 3.5% of its salary and wage budget each year, and that money gets deposited into the Accrued Benefits Fund. And then most years on January 1st, employees get a pay increase, and so the value of their hours goes up every time we give them a pay increase. So it's our liability. So this is the charge. So this pie chart's going to reflect payroll in each department. Not quite per FTE, because some departments tend to have higher paying positions than others, but this is going to reflect a payroll breakdown. So this...
You want me to talk about?
Yeah, this is different than
this one,
the normal expense line.
So, and all the other, this is the only budgeted fund long-term model where we're not looking at the working capital balance. We're not looking at a cash goal. We're actually looking at the liability that we have outstanding to if employees left the city, what we would pay them out in their accrued vacation, comp time, personal time. So the current assets, the cash, is at the bottom of the slide. So at the end of 2020, the liability, we're projecting it to be over $17 million. And we have are projecting to have $13.7 million in this fund, and that's 80% of the liability. And there's an amount in the 2020 projected column of $1,250,000, and that's another amount, kind of like the pool vessel amount, that we've identified that we could potentially use if we need it this year in 2020 to address the budget shortfall because of our greatly reduced revenues. So that's what we're projecting out in here. And so that would take our, where instead of being about 90% funded, with a goal to eventually get to 100% funded is really what the auditors want to see, and credit rating agencies. We have brought it down to 80%, where we would not want to get below 80% without jeopardizing our credit rating. And that, again, I guess, and just like the pool vessel and this money, this would just be this is a one-time thing that we would be able to use just for 2020, not ongoing.
Any questions? Josh?
Mr. Chair, members, Chris, can you just explain what the liability is at 17 million?
Yeah, that's if
What-
you take all of our employees, so we have about 580 full-time employees, and they all have, well, not all, but many of them have banks of hours of vacation time that they've accrued over the years and have not used, or personal leave or comp time that they have built up over the years and not used. And so they have a right to a payout to that under our union contracts and our employment rules when they depart employment. And so if you take all 580 employees and you add up all of their banks and multiply them by their hourly wage, our liability at the end of 2019 was $16.6 million.
Mr. Chair, Chris, is there a cap on that?
There are caps. They are pretty large and generous. So our employees are allowed to have up to 1,000 hours of personal leave, and then they're allowed to have twice their accrual, 2 years worth of their vacation leave. So vacation, you accrue more the longer you've worked for the city, and so that amount, you'd have to look at the chart and see how long somebody worked here to know. But we do have employees who have their accounts maxed out, who, let's say, roughly have 1,400 hours of some form of paid leave on the books with the city. So.
Other questions? Not seeing any other questions. Let's go on.
One thing did just occur to me. We had some discussion about this fund. We're a little concerned that our liability is going to take a decent sized jump when we tally this up at the end of this year, because our employees are not taking vacations and not traveling right now. And just the threat of potentially getting ill makes people more conservative with their PTO. So we are sort of hypothesizing that our liability here is going to grow more than normal when we tally this up at the end of the year. But that's, at this point, that's just a hypothesis.
I think I mean, I've been in my one-on-ones with my staff, I've been telling everyone that they need to take vacation because I don't want people to disappear on November 15th. Because we have use it or lose it, which is, pretty common in the technology industry. But I think the idea that people aren't taking vacation, because a lot of times vacation is around an event or a destination, and there's a lot of that they can't do now. So that's a pretty reasonable kind of idea that you got there. Other comments or questions? Maureen?
Mr. Chair, Chris, you mentioned the union contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So in those contracts, what is the required, you mentioned some how things would be paid out that they can take when they leave. Is that union versus non-union? Is that different? Is it equal across the board?
This is, we strive very hard to keep all of our benefits equal across the board. And so There's a very slight difference between the sworn police officer's vacation schedule and not everybody else's, but it's very, very slight. You'd have to really study the accrual tables to pick it out. Personal leave is uniform across all of our employees. And the same is true back in the Employee Benefits Fund, those health insurance benefits and dental benefits. We've worked hard over the years, so all benefits eligible employees have exactly the same choices in city contribution and everything.
Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments here? Okay, let's go ahead.
That was all I had.
That was
we made it through.
We made it through. We did. Look at that.
Yes, time for some wrap up.
Yeah. So before we do the wrap up, it was pointed out to me that we didn't approve the minutes from the last meeting. And so before we have our kind of final discussion, I would entertain a motion regarding the minutes from the last meeting.
So move.
It's been moved by John Locks. Is there a second? Anyone want a second? John Gibbs is a second. Question is approval of the minutes from the last meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Okay, so I guess wrap up here. Jamie, did you have any final comments before we wrap it up here?
Mr. Chairs, I don't. I'm happy to respond to any questions that committee members have.
Okay, any questions or comments or feedback? Josh.
Mr. Chair, Jamie, and I may have missed it. It's been some long days here the last few weeks, but will this committee get a kind of economic forecast in terms of what either nationally, the state, or the cities expect? What our projections are over the next 1 to 10 years in the economy that will then inform potential tax revenues and what we're dealing with? Because as I reflect back on the charter, we're to keep in mind both short and long-term considerations.
Mr. Chairs and committee members, we haven't officially built anything like that into the schedule. I would say, however, it's going to be part and parcel of what we do as we're working through the budget process later this fall. A couple of events that I think will trigger some reevaluation by our internal team that's been doing the forecast. I think the most significant is whether Congress does something additional in the next few weeks, recognizing that they are under some pressure to do another round of whether you call it stimulus or economic assistance, however that plays out. And then we're just going to be keeping an eye on the unemployment figures and the lodging industry and the hospitality industry are I think the three biggest indices for us, other than whatever happening at the state or the national level.
Mr. Chair, members, Jamie, I just when you look at the economic forecast for the country, they range anywhere from growth to kind of ongoing deficit, decline. So I think we do need to at least have a kind of a bird's eye view a little bit what might be coming at Minnesota, so that as we make these decisions, that we're not back here in 12 months with a second round of this committee having to make some tough decisions next year. So I just would, again, urge that we're looking long-term and at least get some things on the table that we're debating, whether or not we make those decisions, we can further, for the public good, some options moving forward.
John?
Neil.
A follow-up on that. Thank you. Lori, you told us you're going to go to the council with your preliminary number. I thought I wrote it down someplace, but I can't find it. You're going to present it to the council in the next couple of weeks? Did I hear that?
I can answer that,
Okay.
Chair Peterson and committee members. So on our calendar, let's see. We have scheduled Monday, August 31st. It's a city council study session, and that the committee would present the proposal for the preliminary tax levy.
Okay.
And then That would be a study session. And then on Monday, September 14th, is when we would have scheduled for the city council at their regular business meeting to approve the preliminary tax levy. And that has to be done before the end of September.
No, I'm sorry, I guess I'm stating it correctly. I thought I heard that there's a preliminary number that somebody's got on their desk for what 21 is going to look like. So that when we start talking and presenting, what kind of a number is in that budget that he's speaking about that we can use? We're kind of throwing around 5 million and 6 million. What is the number we should be using?
We should have that shortly. So the internal budget team in finance is pulling together all of the department requests. And over the last few weeks, we've been meeting with the departments individually to walk through what they've submitted. So when we get through all of the molding and the changes after having those conversations is when we have a better idea of what that number is. And I expect that's going to be in the next week or two.
And that's a number that we would have access to discuss?
Yes, you bet.
That's what I was looking for.
Yep.
Other comments or questions? So one comment for the group is, we're on a trajectory to try to make a decision on the preliminary levy recommendation to the city council. And I think you heard today that 10% number, which is the number if you were going to make the kind of expense side whole and cover the whole thing that we're talking about here with taxes. I think one of the questions that people need to think about, and we don't need to answer it tonight, but you need to think about is that a number that you want to pick as that top number, or do we want to pick a different top number? And we don't need to make a decision tonight, but the time is going to kind of push us into making a decision, because any number lower than 10%, less the couple kind of things that we've picked up so far, maybe that's 2%. So maybe any number lower than 8% is going to necessarily mean that we've got to find more in the budget, either in kind of money that we're pulling out of reserves or reduced spending. And so remember that the number that we're going to pick is the cap. That's the maximum levy that can be done. So, Neil.
Mr. And I think that's what I was asking, what the city manager is going to be coming with after talking to his department heads. Give us a starting number. What is that number? Because you're right, we're have to go after it. And then my follow-up to that is, because we're only 1/3 of the tax levy, the school district is in there and Hennepin County's in there. Any idea where they're going to come down?
Yes. Mr. Chairs and committee members, this is a comment that Mr. Gibbs had made at the previous meeting as well about the other taxing jurisdictions that Bloomington taxpayers will have to pay for. And I had a follow-up conversation with the superintendent, so I will be getting that number from him. I think they're pretty close to having an idea of what their number is for next year. The county will be a little bit tougher to get, because I think they'll probably hold that a little closer to the vest until they get closer to the preliminary levy. But the school district should have theirs shortly, and I'll make sure that we get that back into the mix.
Other comments or questions? Josh.
Sure. So in terms of the options that I'm hearing you discuss, we can raise taxes, we can cut programs and services, or we can do some accounting shifting from the future to the current. Am I understanding that?
That's right. Yeah, basically.
Basically what we have.
Or a combination of all of them.
Or a combination of all of them
Yeah.
to find the right mix.
Right.
Yeah. And if we just to give you an example, if we're super aggressive for 21 on going through the kitties, and we take the $60,000 from the one fund and the $1.5 million from another fund, and we solve the fiscal 21 problem with that, it leaves the fiscal 22 budget with a lot fewer set of options. So one of the one of the things we have to do is obviously our charge is kind of looking primarily at 21, but we don't want to leave the cupboard empty going into 22. I think that that would be a disservice to the council, whether they choose to run another process like this in 21 for 22 or take this on themselves, leaving that empty, particularly because we know that the dynamics of the property tax is going to have impacts in that period. And so I think we know that something is going to happen there, and it would just be wrong to suck all that up for 21 and not leave something to help deal with things in 22.
And Mr. Chair, as committee members, I'd agree with that. And I think the discussion about 22 is going to be a relatively late occurring conversation in this process. And the reason I say that is that I think a lot of the knowledge that we'll have about where the tax base is going for 22 is still going to play out the rest of this year. The forecast team that is watching our local economy and watching the national economy just pointed out a national retail expert identifying that there are 1,000 malls around the country, and his expectation is that as many as a third to half won't survive this, right? And so that's the kind of pressure that is going to be on those commercial properties, which is certainly going to affect their property tax valuation. And so until we have a little better indication about what those forces are, the conversation about 22 is going to be tough to have. So I think that's probably more of an October conversation.
And if you're, I got my glasses caught up in this mask. I'll be glad when masks are done. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm feeling that way. And the other thing I just noticed is just kind of driving around the community is you're seeing more and more, I would guess, kind of, at least at the retail level, kind of temporary vacancies turning into permanent vacancies, and kind of landlords taking signs down, just in terms of kind of spaces that used to give the appearance of a business there that might have been temporarily closed, now it being a permanent closure. That, I think that's getting traction. And if you've been paying attention in the paper, in the dining area, there's been a bunch of kind of high-profile closures where people have tried to come back and reopen their business. And at least the articles in the paper have been kind of at the higher end of the dining business. But I think there's a dynamic where people have tried restarting their business here with the kind of reduction in restrictions, and they're seeing that the business model just doesn't work. That has yet to play out completely in the community, and particularly as we get to the point where the patio is no longer an appealing thing. And at least in our family, if we go out to eat, it's going to be on a patio, and we're looking at November and trying to decide how appealing the patio is in November. But I think you're right, Jamie, that this still has to play out, and we have both that, and we have the impacts of the end of the eviction moratoriums that are on, and the kind of dynamics around the unemployment that have yet to be resolved that also will have big impacts. So, other questions or comments?
I do have a question, I guess, that we can talk about or not talk about next meeting. But for the the CARE Act funding, I think in one of the points on the slide, it was talking about that it can cover like homelessness or the unsheltered or something like that. Is the city experiencing a lot of, I guess, issues with the unsheltered? And if so, do you think it's going to maybe increase as a result of the eviction? I guess.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee members, Akuya, we are regularly talking to Veep and Oasis especially, who are the primary non-governmental units that are working in that sector. The housing instability issue is real, and Veep is dealing with that through rental housing assistance. How many of those families are potentially moving into homelessness is not clear yet. For Oasis, their primary clientele is youth and young people, and they're seeing a pretty steady holding pattern with the people they serve. The behavior hasn't changed too much. There's a lot of couch hopping and that kind of thing that's going on. So I don't know that we're seeing a spike. We're not experiencing the same phenomenon that Minneapolis is with encampments popping up in public areas. So that's a trend that has not found its way here yet. And whether the homeless, the number of homeless is going to increase, I think to Chair Peterson's point, until we know what happens with the eviction moratoriums and the reduction in benefits that people are receiving in the next couple of weeks, is when we'll probably see an uptick in that area.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, not seeing any hands up. So with that, I will declare the meeting adjourned.
Good. Thank you, everybody. Good discussion.